Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Gets Bitten by a Spider? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. You can't be a hero was the phrase Izuku was used to hearing almost on the daily, following him around like a fly he couldn't wave off, somehow always finding its way to circle around his head even when unprompted. But he always tried his best to not let it mess around with his mind and slow him down, always tried his best because he knew there had to be a way. No matter how much people didn't believe in him, no matter how many hits he took, he was always able to get back up. Nothing was going to stop him in achieving his dream. Is what would have been the case if he didn't hear that exact same sentence from the man who he looked up to the most. His hero. The one he looked up his whole life. Always striking a smile in moments of danger. Never giving up. He always made sure to show up, to show everyone that hope wasn't lost. That's why they call him the symbol of peace. All Might was the hero of the people. And God does Izuku admire him. How could he not? He was perfect, something always dreamed of being. His whole life he chased a goal that was out of his reach. Never enough. He always tried so hard. So many times. He went to sleep so often with a smile on his face, completely exhausted and barely able to keep going because his dream kept him going. It was everything to him. He has always been fond of heroes, the act of saving. He always wanted to save people. To help them. He wanted people to feel hopeful when he shows up on the scene. He wanted people to find the same comfort in him as they do with All Might. But he never had the support from others. Nobody ever tried to support him. People would tell him all kinds of things. Well, just become a psychologist. You would be a perfect doctor. You're so smart you'd nail it in a second. Izuku, you'd make a great cop. They help people too, pretty similar to heroes. Become a teacher. You'll teach future heroes. Become this, become that. Never did he hear his dreams get approved. Never got told, you can be a hero. Nobody was going to accept him quirkless, it's just the truth. Everyone always tried to find alternatives they saw fitting, rather than to even attempt to figure out a way. Some way figure out how he can be a hero even if he was born quirkless. There wasn't anything wrong with the professions people suggested. But it hurt. Especially now that his dreams are basically crushed. Beaten down to a pipe, leaving nothing behind. Never would he even think that the words of one person would strike him down this hard. Izuku walked down the dark and unforgivingly cold alley. He could smell the strong odor coming from the sewers with each step. It was an unpleasant area to be in, and frankly it was making his mood worse. He has been stalling coming back home. He has no idea how he was going to act normal around his mother after he had the worst day of his life. The entire day was insanely inconvenient. Before coming to school he watched heroes save the day in awe. Analyzing the whole fight, paying attention to any detail he knows he could use in the future when he becomes a hero. Turns out that isn't needed anymore. Okay, then he was late to class. Got bullied, mocked. Whatever. He got attacked by a villain, got saved by All Might. Then he got told he can't be a hero. No problems. And since then he has been wandering around the city. He has no idea where he has been going this entire time. Everything around him has been oddly quiet ever since then. The speeding of cars was gone, the chatter of the people, the loud steps everyone took. All he could hear was the constant ringing in his ear. Even now at night, it's unusual for it to be this quiet. Because of course the one time he isn't studying at night, trying his best to focus on the work in front of him but failing to do so because all his mind was set on was the noise of the honking cars in the middle of the night, everything has to quiet. Reminds him of how unfair everything is. Izuku kept walking, slowly, he kept trying to get himself to calm down. But he couldn't stop thinking about it. Every step felt heavy. Nothing was working in his favor. Maybe in another life things went down differently today. Maybe he got blessed with some sort of revolutionary event that would change the rest of his years forever. He doesn't even know how he's supposed to get home. His mom must be so worried. Izuku felt as if his throat was closing up as he thought of her. Beads of sweat started rolling down his face as his walking turned into pacing, getting faster with every step. She is always so worried about him. What was he thinking? He should have went home. He doesn't understand how he let himself just wander off like that. He has been gone for hours. It's selfish. He should have put his mother first. He opened up the map on his phone to see how many minutes he'll need to get to his house. And boy, he needed a lot. Too much time. He really felt like he was losing himself now. His fast-paced walking has basically turned into running. He has to check the time. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe he could make up an excuse he has to stay because of a project, or that he got in detention again because he got into a fight with Kakin and that he couldn't tell her because his phone died. Even though it doesn't make too much sense as his detention would only last an hour, but there was the fact he got attacked by a villain today that he could try and use that, so the lie makes more sense. But then again, he doesn't feel like telling her that. She would make a big fuss about it. It wouldn't be a bigger fuss than him coming home late though. His options were pretty bleak. He would be able to lie and say he got stuck somewhere, but they live in a highly populated area. There was no way a hero wouldn't have saved him in that time. Right, he needs to check the time. It was 11 in the night. If there was a time to start hyperventilating, he thinks this would be a socially acceptable time to do so. He followed the directions in desperation as thousands of different scenarios raced through his mind. He had to make up something. He doesn't have the heart to tell her the truth. He really could use some help right now. Izuku kept running. Clutching onto his bag and phone as hard as possible, he felt like he could barely breathe. His throat was basically giving up on him and his lungs feel like they got all the air out them vacuum se. His thought bubble was burst by the fact he very much bumped into someone pretty harshly. He was already bracing himself for impact, ready to waste his saving on repairing his phone screen, but it never came. You're in a big rush, huh? When he looked around, completely snapped out of his panicked frenzy, he realized he was floating, actually floating above the group. His eyes snapped up and in front of him he was met with a brunette looking at him with her round eyes and rosy cheeks full of curiosity. She has a small, slightly nervous smile on her face. Probably creeped out or maybe scared by the fact she just got bumped into by a guy who was running, in complete distress, in the middle of the night. She walked up to him, setting her grocery bag down. It didn't look full, just a couple of small items stashed in it. With great care, she set Izuku down on his feet, careful to not get him to freak out harder. She was practically walking around on eggshells while doing so. "Are you okay?" she said with an obvious unease in her voice. She looked around in all sorts of directions, while she waited for Izuku to calm down. She seemed quite concerned, almost untrusting of him, like she didn't know what he could possibly be up to. She took a step back and tried to keep eye contact, but she felt unease. It took Izuku a good minute to settle down and get his brain running again. "Yeah, I was supposed to be home 8 hours ago. It's so late, my mom must be worried," Izuku said very nervously, fidgeting with his fingers as he spoke. He was so screwed. He is now talking to this girl he barely knows. He's wasting time. He needs to excuse himself and start going home. He didn't even thank her. He has to thank her first. Then he can pack himself up and start running home. He won't make it there fast enough if he just keeps sitting around here doing absolutely nothing. T-dash. The girl cut off Izuku with a small laugh. "Yeah, me too. I arrived to the nearest store 3 hours ago, but I couldn't use my bike because it broke, and I don't exactly live near a place with a lot of stores." She smiled and lifted her bag back up in her hands, her pinky being the only finger sticking out the hold. "I am actually only a couple minutes away from my home, but you ran into me. By the way you were all distressed, I thought there might have been a villain attack nearby. But guess not. Well, I can understand it. Stuff happens." Her face lit up again. She laughed. She seemed friendly. Izuku isn't used to people being friendly to him. Harsh comments and cruel laughter was all he has known. It's engraved in his mind. There was nothing he can do to fix it, no matter how hard he pushed. But now, for a second, he was able to forget all of it. He felt calmer around her presence. It was comforting, strangely enough. He laughed awkwardly. He wasn't used to people his age being nice to him. Typically, it's older people who treat him nice, calling him a sweetheart, a gentleman, a passionate young man. All sorts of compliments that he can't help but smile at them every time he hears them. Well, she spoke awkwardly, but more relaxed now upon realizing Izuku wasn't running away from a threat. We should both get going. Good luck, hope you make it in time. Before Izuku could reach out her hand to stop her, to thank her, maybe ask her if they could be friends, she already started walking away. And he didn't have the guts to call out for her. He didn't even know her name. He was so lost. Beyond lost. In his own little world that has been so chaotic today. She was a nice distraction from said chaos though. The girl in general was really nice. Really makes him wish that other people treated him like she did. He sometimes wishes Kaken would be that nice to him. He used to be nice when they were kids. But quirks changed everything for the worse. He wishes he has a quirk so often and he still does. Well, enough of that, now he has to go back to the chaos. Even though he's beyond fed up, he couldn't even get to know anything about her aside from the fact she lives far away from him, stores, and has a broken bike. He still has to get going. Oh, and a levitation quirk it seemed. That could be pretty useful in combat. Depending on the scope of her abilities, she could be a great rescue hero. People trapped under rubble would have no problem getting saved, or people who are falling. Like he was. Maybe it could be used for combat. Izuku isn't sure if she can move around the objects as if she had telekinesis, considering she had to step up to him to put her down, but it looks like it would be a useful quirk nonetheless. She would be a great hero with a quirk like that. Maybe she could use it in the sense of, she can be a hero. He can't. Izuku took one last look at the girl. Watching her walk away, she's too far for him to go up to her now. She's probably a minute away from her house now. He kept staring just for a second. He has a feeling he won't be seeing her again. He turned around and started walking, that of course, quickly turned to running. He let his legs carry him through the late-night streets, as if he had nothing weighing him down. But he did. He had a lot of things weighing him down today. But then again, that girl did give him a small lift. He feels more at ease now. He knows his mom will be worried. He knows Inko will freak out when he sees him come back home this late. But it's okay. He will think of something on his way home. Finally come up with something. He isn't going to let himself keep panicking. Even though he's still very nerve-wracked, and he knows he will still most definitely be such for the next couple of days, maybe ever forever, who knows, he was able to calm down a fairly decent amount. He is a bit surprised by how far a small conversation can go. It's a bit strange, he has to admit. After a run that not even a marathon could scope, he was able to arrive in an area he recognized. He stood in front of the crosswalk. There were no cars out this late. He knew this very well. He's still slightly annoyed about it, but that isn't the point now. He technically had to reason to just stand there and wait. But God, he was exhausted. Izuku stood there, panting, soaked in sweat. He could barely catch his breath. He has never ran this fast for so long. His ribs hurt as if they got hit 1,000 times over, until all the air out his lungs got knocked out. He could fall onto his knees from exhaustion. But he was close. He clutched onto his school bag and ran across the street again. He kept looking down while he ran, despite literally bumping into someone an hour ago or maybe even more. He hasn't checked his phone in a while. He couldn't bring himself to look forward. He can only think of his aching limbs as he kept going. He's been such a mess today, he has no idea what tomorrow or 2 months in the future will even look like for a guy like him. He can't even get home on time because of his emotions. Idiot. Absolute idiot. His house felt as if it was 300 kilometers away from him, unreachable at this point even though it practically by his side. He felt like it could slip out his fingers at any given moment. He looked awful. He could feel his school uniform sticking to him from the sweat. It wasn't helping with how overwhelmed he feels in the slightest. He felt greasy, kind of like a soggy cat. He completely drank up all his water too. He was beyond thirsty. A thirsty, maybe hungry, soggy cat. Oh, he would kill for his mother's cooking. It would be a nice treat before he went to sleep in hopes that he will never wake up. He just wants this day to end already. And there was no bigger bliss than realizing he has ended up in front of the entrance of his apartment building. The relief was so sincere he fell down to his knees. He felt as if he just got blessed. Finally, despite feeling unusually itchy, hungry, thirsty, tired, he finally made it home. His muscles ached like hell, every little move felt like he was on fire. Everything felt heavy, but he also felt like he could breathe now. It was refreshing. Beyond refreshing. Finally, after having such a horrible day, something went in his favor. He was able to get back up every time he fell. And so he did once again. He got up and slowly walked over to the entrance, entering the passcode, and with little strength, he pushed the door open. He could barely stand on his legs. He was so tired. He could practically pass out right then and there, but he knew he couldn't. Instead, he dragged his way to the elevator. It was empty, with no person in sight. It felt as if he has been living in a ghost town for the last few hours. Everything felt so off today. Nothing seems like it can slow down. Yet, everything feels so off. As if his world went out of tune. He has this constant gloomy feeling over him, which he knows it's deep down still because of that one sentence burning his skull all day. He slid his back against the elevator's wall and sat down. It was moving a lot slower than usual. They had a couple repairs here and there, but it still isn't back to its fullest. Though the crew has done its hardest, so he can respect that. And suddenly, all that hope he was able to keep under his wing, away from dying out, disappeared the second that elevator stopped and slowly opened its doors. He was worried about his mom's reaction. It's beyond late, well enough into the night. Izuku covered his face with a sigh. He was barely able to get up, he felt so worn out. He could barely focus. Every step felt like needles piercing through every layer of his skin as he walked to his door, which usually brought him a sense of comfort as soon as he opened it. His mom always left him the key to the house because she never leaves the house before Izuku comes back home, just so she could be there if he arrived from school earlier than usual. She always cared so much. He took out the key with trembling hands, taking a couple tries to finally get it to slide into the lock seamlessly. He twisted and turned the key, trying to remember how to unlock doors because his mind was currently betraying him, it seemed. After a couple of failed tries, he finally opened the door. He tried to be as quiet as possible. He sat down right by the now shut door and took of his shoes, then slipping his feet into some slippers. Izuku stayed there for a second, trying to hear if anyone is awake, but he couldn't hear anything. All he could hear was the wind blowing gently through an opened window. He might actually be able to avoid the dreaded conversation till tomorrow. Maybe luck decided to be on his side now. He let out a small sigh of relief as he got up, putting his phone in his pocket. The house felt less hostile. He could feel the returning comfort creeping up on him, reminding him he's a few steps away from heaven. Just a few seconds and he'd be right back in his room, and then he can ponder in the morning what to say. And then everything came crashing down. Izuku. Demon, it really isn't his day today. Izuku is debating if he is cursed at this point. He squeezed his eyes shut and prepared himself for his mother's reaction. Izuku, my baby. Where were you this entire time? Her eyes were red, full of tears. He didn't even know where she came from, but he can confirm it caught him off guard. She looked just as exhausted as he was. She took both of his hands into her own. She was shaking, and Izuku felt a wave of immense guilt wash over him. He's so stupid. It's so late, I was sick from worrying. I kept asking myself, God, what happened to my son? What if he got caught up in the crossfire of that lab incident today? And I called you so many times, you never picked up. I thought you were dead. I was so set on calling the police. And I had to have Mitsuki talk me out of it. Where were you, Izuku? He obviously can't tell her the truth, that's one thing. He also cannot tell her about that sludge villain. His mind is blank. So he tried something else. What lab incident? Her voice trembled as she spoke, and all Izuku could do was try to comfort her by caressing her back gently. There was a malfunction in a lab. During an expo, 20 civilians were injured. I got scared one of them was maybe you. My baby, you know my heart can't handle this. She squeezed one of his hands tighter. Izuku, I want you to be honest with me. Where were you? What happened today? Inko's gaze made Izuku feel almost nauseous. He felt bad about lying to her. Every vein in his body was telling him to just tell her the truth, to soothe her pain. She's so worried she needs to know the truth. But she can't. At least not the full one without a bit of lies. Mom, I'm so sorry. I first got stuck watching a villain fight. And then I got carried away with walking and I stumbled upon a girl whose bike broke down. Izuku avoided her gaze as he spoke. He couldn't lie right to her face. He didn't have the guts to do that. He kept fidgeting with the hem of his uniform, trying to get himself to at least sound believable. Which was hard, considering he isn't a class act liar. Sure, he can lie about how school was and pretend everything was going great there, but this is different. A lot different. He still can't get it out of his head. He's still thinking about All Might's words. Nothing is helping him now. When it comes to telling the truth, that's the one thing he would need to say for her to understand him. But he can't. He can't tell her. He can't bear to watch her like that. Izuku continued with this half-made-up story. She was carrying a lot of stuff and I wanted to help her, so I took it and I walked her home. I just wanted to help. I didn't realize she lived that far away. So I was late. Because of that. Because of that. I ran to here. I'm so exhausted. Baby, you know you can't be reckless like that. You have to think more. What if she kidnapped you? What if she was actually a villain? I know you want to help people, but Izuku, please, it was dangerous. Inko's eyes never stopped streaming tears down her face. She kept crying as she looked at her son. She kept her reassuring hold on his hand, but wasn't completely for him. It was for her. Mom, you're overthinking. You're just frightened. Because of that lab thing. I'm fine, aren't I? You can stop worrying, I'm sorry. It won't happen again. He hasn't heard of any lab incident. But to be fair, he hasn't checked the news or social media in a while. She had a right to be worried. You're grounded. I can't believe this. You used to be so responsible. Mom. There was so much he wanted to say. He wanted to help, to comfort her, to reassure her, everything. He couldn't stand her looking like this, he can't stand her worrying like this. But nothing came out his mouth. All that came out were tears as he sighed, put down his school bag by the living room table and walked to his room. He shut the door. And every little corner reminded him of what All Might told him. He can't stare at his room anymore without feeling sick. He kept getting reminded that his dreams got crushed. Just looking at his figures and merch was painful. Today was awful. Izuku let out an exhausted sigh as he let himself lay down on the ground. It wasn't hygienic, sure. He himself was extremely dirty, but he was too tired. Too tired to do anything. He stared up at the ceiling, his entire body was aching beyond comprehension. He felt as if his heart was stammering against his chest to try and jump out of his body. He took deep breaths with his lungs. Finally. He's home, he can rest. Well, at least physically. The confrontation he had with his mother wasn't too bad. He thought it was going to be scarier. But instead, it just left him feeling like he was drowning in guilt. Everything felt heavy. He didn't want her to worry, he doesn't understand what didn't make him go home sooner. It would have been easier to make up a story about getting detention if he was 2 hours late instead of coming home in the middle of the night. At least he got a nice workout out of this. He forced himself to get up and change into his pajamas, but of course prior to that having to dry himself up using a towel he forgot to put back in the bathroom after washing his hair a couple days ago. Moving was painful, it stinged a lot, every little muscle twitch felt like pins that were stuck inside him. But he has to get dressed, his bed was more comfortable than the floor anyway. The second he finished up the dread of having to move, he let himself fall down onto his bed, not even bothering to get under the covers. The warmth of his bed hit him like a truck. It was so relieving he could start crying again right then and there. His bed never failed him, never. Every time, without fail. Every time something bad happened, every time he felt small because of Kaken's insults, every time he felt useless because his teacher made fun of him, every time he felt humiliated, every time he felt like he didn't belong, he was always able to drift off to sleep and dream of a better life. He wished things were different, he wished he had a quirk. Maybe then, people would respect him. Maybe today All Might would have told him he could have been a hero, maybe he wouldn't have been late, maybe he would get along with his classmates, maybe Kaken would be nice to him, possibly treat him as an equal. He doesn't quite know how he's supposed to process everything. Izuku quickly half dozed off into a sleep, still awake just not enough to have a sense of reality. And because of that, he wasn't quite aware if his brain was making him hallucinate that sudden stingy feeling of getting bit by something. The second he opened his eyes to the sound of his alarm blasting off his phone in the middle of the morning, the noise bounced off the walls, and the only thing Izuku was thinking of was that he had a feeling that he will have the misfortune of having to deal with the pain that would be as if he got ran over by a car 4 times, but instead, he was met with only slight aches in his legs. And a piercing headache. Seriously, he felt like he got stabbed in the head. He has gotten bad headaches before, but it was never this bad. He shut his eyes and buried his face into the softness of his pillow, wishing he could doze back off into his dreamless sleep. He woke up a couple times during the night, but he wasn't rested enough to get up and maybe get something done like he usually would have. Scheming through the night really was his thing, it seemed. He would have maybe studied, doom-scrolled on social media until he felt like falling asleep again, maybe do an analysis on a hero battle or something along the lines of that. He shortly felt himself stir awake, groaning upon hearing his alarm start up again. To Izuku it felt like it was so loud it would have waken up the whole city by now. Seriously, he doesn't know how his mom didn't come into his room and ask him to turn it down. The whole scandal from yesterday had him still so tired, he would sink into his bed and disappear right then and there if he could have. But he can't. He has to get ready for another day of school while not even knowing how to function. He doesn't even know how he'll be able to meet his mother's eyes, let alone speak to her after everything. He already had a bad feeling about today. Izuku messed up more than usual, and that doesn't have him hyped about having to live through today. He sighed as forced his body up. He was very confused by how his body didn't feel so exhausted despite his severe exhaustion overall yesterday, and not to mention the fact he pushed himself too much. It was odd. He remembers once he was late home because Kaken was picking on him and he had to run consistently for 20 minutes, his body ached for days on end. But now, it only felt like a small tingle. He looked down and realized that he was covered by his blanket. Mom must have been in my room. What confirmed his suspicion was when he looked over at his counter where stood his phone plugged in, charging, alarm still ringing, while the soft rays of the morning hit the screen. Izuku looked outside the window just to appreciate the morning for a bit. The sky felt soft, almost like an opening outside the hostility of his room, which used to be a safe space. The day just started and everything was on his mind already. Awful. He needs to get himself together and get ready for school. He doesn't want to be late again. He can't bear hearing the laughter of his peers again. Those people at school really were insufferable. He let out a deep sigh knowing he really can't do much about it. Then, as Izuku stared at the door, he noticed it wasn't blurry. He can't see from afar. He knows he can't. He has his glasses next to an All Might plushie in his room. He hasn't worn them in a while because people used to say he looked like a nerd. This can't be right. It's humanly impossible for your vision to shift a gear overnight and suddenly fix itself without any issue. Izuku rubbed his eyes to possibly check if he was imaging stuff, if he was still under some sort of state of sleepiness that was making his brain think he's crazy, or maybe it's that headache. Yeah, probably no problem. His headache was making him hallucinate good vision. But when he removed his hands it was still crystal clear. His brows furrowed in confusion as he rested his head in his arm, it cupping his cheek as he got lost in thought. This can't be real, he's dreaming. He's too lost in his own imagination. He has to just snap out of it and get ready for school already. He's dragging this on for too long. He was about to hop out of bed when his blanket got stuck to his palm. Okay, maybe he wasn't dreaming. Izuku instinctively started trying to wave the blanket off, but it wouldn't come off. It was like it was super glued to his hand in a very inconvenient manner. He basically had to throw all his dreams of not being laid out the window. This was by no means normal. This couldn't be just some weird scenario life decided to put him through. His senses left as if they got multiplied by 1,000, his body is recovering faster than usual, not to mention the fact he has his blanket stuck to him without any sort of reason for it to be so. This couldn't be anything else than some sort of quirk effect. Something might have struck him yesterday when he wasn't paying attention. Izuku isn't exactly an oblivious kid. He can figure something out pretty easily, but he didn't understand why this was happening. How come this is only happening now? If he was younger, he would have assumed it was a quirk manifestation, even though it wouldn't make sense due to his parents' quirks. But it can't be that. He's way past that mark. This was something else. Did the sludge monster possibly do this? No, It couldn't be him, he wasn't sticky, and there's no way in hell he could have fixed his declining eyesight. He instantly flew into panic mode, trying to kick off the blanket off his palm, but in the progress getting his hand stuck to the wall as he attempted to get support to not get his back slammed into it. Izuku whipped his head around and tugged at his other hand stuck to the wall with all his might, but it wouldn't pop off. Same issue was going on with his first hand. Only his legs were free, so of course as any rational person would do he prioritized getting the hand stuck to the wall behind and free, since with the blanket he can move around, with the wall basically chained to him he can't. He put one of his feet on it for support while the other stood on the ground as he tugged at the wall. He couldn't help but notice that the grip his arms had gotten tighter, which in return made him stress out more. "Come on," he whispered to himself as he continued to pull. He ripped his blanket. "That's going to be hard to explain." Izuku gulped as he stared at the torn fabric. It was one of his favorites too. Damn it. Out of anger, he accidentally tugged a bit too hard on the wall, and before he knew it, he practically flew to the ground, hitting his head with a dried-up layer of paint stuck to his hand. He gasped for air out of shock as he watched the world upside down. What was that? Izuku winced upon feeling the impact left from the fall. It burned hard. He wanted to hold onto his head in an attempt to soothe his pain, but he was too scared his hands would get stuck in his hair, so instead he kept them in the air, not touching anything. But now he had a new problem. His foot was still stuck to his wall. Yeah, he might be cursed at this point. He moved his head up and just stared at his leg. He had uncontained anger swirling in him, but that left him a literal layer from the wall in front of his stuck to his palm as if it were sewn on. He started pulling on his leg, and yet once again, that didn't work. He got himself back up on the bed, arms still not even coming a sense twinge close to anything. Can anything go as planned anymore? Izuku muttered to himself in annoyance as he kept trying to remove his stuck limb from something for the third time this morning. At this point he wanted to give up, but he seriously needed to get to school. Only if it were Saturday. Out of almost instinct at this point, he put his other foot on the wall and started pulling on his leg with his arms, trying not to wince at the feeling of the wall remains getting crushed on his skin. He was already getting exhausted from this. He decided to let go just for a moment, to lay his head down. But when he was somehow able to let go of his leg with his arms, he didn't find himself letting his head hit the bed. His body was in the air, literally floating. Izuku's eyes popped wide open in shock. He puffed up his cheeks with air and closed his eyes shut as he attempted to walk on the wall, to go higher rather than down, despite the fact it would have been smarter to get down and start going to school already. Fear flooded his body, but he kept going, just to see how far he can go. It's as if yesterday's prayers got answered. This isn't something a person can just do. A quirkless person can't just start sticking to walls like this. It's also impossible that he just started manifesting his quirk this late. He had time to manifest it. There's no possible way it would manifest in his early teens. Izuku reached the top of the wall, trying his best to keep himself standing straight. The uncomfortable position was making him more nerve-wracked than he needed to be, realistically speaking. He swallowed nervously as he decided to do something he didn't quite think was a good idea. But he needs to see how far he can go. He put his arms on the ceiling, trying his best not to look down because he swore on his soul that he was going to die if he did so. He was going to be so late, beyond late. If he was in a competition for it, he'd get first place without a single doubt. But he had more important things to worry about. So as he intended, Izuku started to crawl on the ceiling. He was beyond freaked out by the fact this is actually working in his favor. Odd how fast the tables flipped. If you told him that he would be crawling around his ceiling yesterday, he would have assumed you were out of your mind. "Izuku, are you done?" Inko called out, completely oblivious to the ongoing situation her son is in. "Almost," he yelled out as he took a second to look down. Getting down won't look pretty. He doesn't have time to crawl back down, so he'll just have to pray and hope the gods are on his side today, even though it seems they aren't, and he will be able to unstick and fall down without making a sound. Which is almost impossible, but considering the fact he has seemingly developed a literal quirk, anything can be possible. Izuku had to swallow his fear and he started unsticking his limbs one by one, arm by arm, and leg by leg. That is, until the last arm got stuck to the ceiling seemingly out of nowhere and got him practically swinging from it, leaving him hanging upside down. "Oh, come on," he whispered in frustration as he stared to pull on his leg again. Just as he thought everything was going okay, this had to happen. This was more a curse than a blessing. It seemed people were actually right when they told him to be careful what he wished for, because this was hell. But then again, that was only his current anger talking. No matter how lost or confused he may be, this is truly a blessing. He finally got the only thing he wished for years on end. Maybe now, he can be a hero. He can pursue his dreams and become just like All Might. Right now that he has a quirk, All Might would tell him he could be a hero. His room wasn't so hard to look at anymore. And then he fell on his head again, with a loud thud, leaving his body on the ground. That certainly didn't help him with the skull-piercing headache he was dealing with, much less the newly gained neck and back pain. "Everything's okay." He got up, his head was spinning faster than the heroes can say plus ultra during the ends of commercials or interviews. After taking a moment to let his head clear up, he took his uniform that was now neatly folded up and washed till every microbit of the fabric was clean and went to the bathroom to take a bath. He was practically speedrunning everything now that he was out of his room. He can't comprehend he has a quirk now. Same way he couldn't comprehend that he was suddenly jacked. Seriously, what quirk even is this? Izuku was getting more lost in confusion by the minute. No wonder he healed so fast from the burnout of yesterday. Whatever his quirk was, it was beyond complex and great at healing. He also conveniently noticed that he has an itchy, red bite mark on his hand. From the looks of it, it's a spider's bite, one that cramped like hell, but somehow that was the least of his worries. He was basically operating mechanically as he kept doing his typical morning routine because all he could think about was the abnormality in all of this. He felt like an anomaly. Compared to everyone else, if this was actually a quirk, which it has to be, it was very different. Most people just get one or two abilities, instantly know how to use them and move on. But he was a different story. He had no clue how to control his stickiness, or how his body and vision even got fixed. Can he heal others? Was this a one-time thing? Is the stickiness a one-time thing? Will he be able to crawl over ceilings again? Can he crawl over a wall in the same way? Before he could realize it, he was at the dining table with his mother. Izuku was mindlessly poking at his food, taking multiple tries to finally stab it to put it on his fork and eat it like a sane person. His face looked blank, but his mind was racing with thoughts not even light years could catch up to. "Izuku, baby, now that you're all rested," I thought. Inko attempted to talk to Izuku, fidgeting with her fingers on the top of the table while she locked eyes with her son. "I can't right now, I gotta get to school. I'm already running late, Mom." He dismissed her with a small bite to his tone on accident. His words were said without thinking much about them. He had bigger problems on his plate than to talk about yesterday. That can wait. And frankly, he's not in the mood. He didn't have time for this. "Izuku. Please." Izuku's gaze snapped back up. He took into account the way his mother looked at him, the way she was trying to reach out to cup of one of his hands, but he moved back and looked back down to his food. He couldn't bear to look at her. It hurt to do so. He chewed ferociously as his mother stared at him with a face that had hints of guilt, her eyes furrowed in worry and her eyes squinted as she watched her son, who broke the gaze they were sharing and got hyper-focused on his food. He felt a quite handful of guilt himself for doing this, but he didn't have time. He was in a constant state of feeling as if he had to catch up to something, as if he had a goal to chase, as if something was calling out for him. But he's going to save that for later. What seemed to be a new side effect was the fact he was seemingly 20 times more hungry than usual. He could swear he could eat a whole feast right then and now. This was weird, so weird, really, really weird. And he can't exactly start to freak out to his mother about this. Or anyone for a matter of fact. He doesn't know or understand where all of this originated from yet. He felt lost more than ever. He knows it wouldn't be a good idea to tell anyone about this. Not yet. He has to understand the origin of this first. How this came to be. And that was going to be pretty hard, and probably the only thing he was going to think of in during school. Man, he's really glad spring break is around the corner, just 2 weeks or so away. Only thing that's bothering him is how all his tests are during this PRD. That is going to be a pain to deal with when tests are the least of his worries, especially. Now when his whole life is a jumbled mess of stings he needs to sort out. He finished up his meal and quickly took his yellow back and was basically ready to bolt out the apartment right then and there before Inko came to the door. Out of instinct he stopped. "I love you, Izuku." She gave him a weak smile. And despite it being a bit off, he gave one back. Izuku tapped his pen against his paper and he stared at the sheet in front of him. Even though he felt unstoppable when he was running to school, at the present he couldn't focus on the exam in front of him because of all the new noises he could suddenly hear out the blue. Every little move felt too loud, every scribble, every whisper, every step. He's going to need to get himself some noise-canceling headphones after his because this was beyond inconvenient. He thankfully wasn't late. He really wasn't in the mood to get lectured by his teacher once more, but being on time didn't seem to stop him from already having problems in school. He slept through one class. The rest he didn't really pay much attention because he was busy with other thoughts. You could surely guess what they were. He had to ignore a bunch of snarky comments from his classmates who seemingly couldn't leave him alone recently. And now, he was met with an exam that he was barely able to do. He was a smart guy. He knew that. He knew he was supposed to be able to do this. He knows what he's able to answer on a piece of paper and what he can't. But for some reason that wasn't enough to get his head to roll back into action. Because all he could think about were his newly gained abilities. With every accidental tap of the paper with his fingers, he had this fear it would get stuck to his hand. With every change of position he feared he wouldn't be able to readjust. With every scribble that was too fast he got scared he wouldn't be able to part ways with his pen after. He was having quite the problem adjusting to it all. He really was failing to get used to everything. But there was one question that haunted his mind. What to do now? The bell rang and Izuku was met with the dreadful realization that he wasted half his time thinking. He barely did 3/4 THS of the test, which for most people seemed decent enough, but for him this meant he was going to get a bad grade. How convenient, he thought to himself with slight annoyance. He was by no means content with that, even though his mom would always tell him there's always next time, or that he tried his best and still did good, a lot of encouragement that did help, but didn't quite change his opinion. "Everyone tests on your left. Do not pack until I take them all." The teacher yelled out as everyone followed the request, and it was quite irritating to hear the sound of the shuffling papers, pens, the chairs being pulled the floor, out of every sense that could have gotten amplified. He was sure that hearing shouldn't have been one of them. Izuku had luck with not getting his paper stuck to him. Thankfully he wouldn't have to embarrass himself further. He let out an exhausted sigh, rubbing his eyelids to try and get himself to boot up. And after that, he quickly packed up and left the classroom. He was first to leave, funnily enough. He's usually last. The last thing Izuku saw was Kaken staring at him with a nasty look. He was oddly quiet. He didn't say much to Izuku the entire day. Sure, a couple remarks were thrown here and there, but it wasn't anything too bad. It made Izuku feel a bit weird. Today was really weird. Sure, there were days like these, they happened 1,000 times before, but for some reason it felt unnatural this time around. He couldn't quite grasp as to why. He sighed and took out his phone while he walked downstairs. That lab incident from yesterday was all over social media. He lazily read what people were saying. None of their scrambled posts were really catching his attention. Just people freaking out, and that really wasn't he needed at the moment, so of course he had to look elsewhere. And he did until he found a reliable news source. He opened up the link and watched the screen shift to an article. Nothing out the ordinary, but he was still very intrigued. And turns out he had a right to be. The incident happened nearby the area where he was talking to the nice person. A project gone wrong, an error in the system caused a set of safety measures to shut down, which led to some of the subjects they were testing on to escape, one of them being a genetically mutated, radioactive spider. It had to have bitten him. There was no other explanation. He wouldn't have all these crazy abilities and a spider bite on his hand otherwise. It must have climbed onto him while he was staying still, or it bit him during that time period. He felt his knees lock into place and his hands to slightly shake as he kept reading. He got bit by a radioactive spider. That's cool, yeah, no problem. Very cool, no issues whatsoever. There were no problems with that, yup. He felt as if he was going to topple over and fall into unconsciousness any given minute. How did he even gain powers from a spider? It wouldn't be physically possible unless the venom contained quirk factors. Does he have venom now? Can he shoot webs? Doesn't seem like it. Seemingly he was sticking to every little thing because it was, most likely, his web fluid which he very obviously cannot control. He doesn't even know how to train it. He knows nothing. Will he start morphing into a spider? Is it a mutation quirk? Can he paralyze people if he has venom? Will he start sensing vibrations soon? It does seem possible considering his hearing has gotten more advanced. He had a lot of questions, to say the least. Before he knew it he was out the school, and despite everything he decided to walk around once again. But this time it wasn't mindless, he wasn't going to get lost. He had a plan and he was going to act it out. First thing was to text his mom that he was going to come home a bit late, just to not repeat the same mistake and make her worry again. He doesn't want that, never again. The second was to look around grocery stores that are furthest away from his home. He wanted to try to find that girl from yesterday, to thank her for catching him yesterday, give her an update, ask for her name, see how she's doing, see if they could maybe be friends, ask her about the lab incident if she knows anything because he desperately needs insight into how to control these powers. A lot of stuff. He felt so lost. The streets were excruciatingly loud this time around. The best way Izuku could describe it was if someone left 20 vacuums working simultaneously in one small room. He always had problems with noise. He used to walk around with headphones since they would block out a bit of background noise, but time around that definitely wouldn't work. Since he woke up, all of it has been driving him crazy. Maybe he should have brought some money to buy those canceling one's headphones he wanted, or even brought his normal ones like he usually would have. But it's a bit late for that now. He has a long way to walk. He specifically chose not to run. He knew he would have arrived way too early like that. Sure, he felt a bit like a stalker. No sane person goes around waiting for a stranger they spoke to once, but he was kind of desperate. She lived in that area. Surely she must have gotten a lot more information that he could have gotten from scraping the internet. And he did feel quite guilty for not thanking her, so it checks out. Izuku wasn't the type to exactly pay attention to the street when he walked. There were dozens of times he toppled over someone on accident or bumped into a pillar or a wall. There were a handful of instances where his clumsiness was caused due to the fact he always had a set goal and didn't quite look at his surroundings. He was always more focused on how crowded the street was, and to be frank, he still was, and the busyness was making him feel a bit sick. But he felt a sense of comfort seeing all of these people safe. He sighed and continued walking, carefully placing his hands over his ears to drown out some of the noise dancing around him. And eventually he got to a store. He didn't exactly do anything. He kind of stood in front of it and camped there, as if she was just going to magically appear at the other end. He was slightly starting to regret this, considering his stomach was growling and he looked a bit manic standing and politely waiting outside a store kind of far away from the busier part of town. He felt quite tired as well. He could swear to himself he would have fallen asleep right then and there if he didn't, seemingly out of nowhere, start to feel an odd, tingly sensation in the back of his skull. For a second he wasn't sure what happened, what any of it meant, until every fiber in his body was telling him to run away. And he planned on doing so, especially because the tingling got worse, and he really wasn't in the mood to deal with that. But the loud sound of destruction made him want to run right into the direction of the danger his head was warning him about, the same danger his head was screaming at him to not go near. It was sheer curiosity. He just wanted to see what heroes would show up and then decide to call it quits and go home. He doesn't want to repeat yesterday by any means. Even though he knew this was probably a bad idea, he decided to do it. He started to run. This time around, his enhanced hearing was working with him, not against him. Izuku could easily pinpoint where the disaster was happening. His feet carried him through the alleyways without any problems. The sound of cracks, breaks, struggling, screaming of people, he could hear it all. It was a bit odd. Spiders typically hear worse than people, but then again if he inherited the exact senses a spider had, he'd be legally blind, so it's better he didn't complain. It was a mutated spider after all. Its senses were probably modified to be better. That spider was still out somewhere in his room, or outside now that he thought about it. He needs to find it and try to study it. He would greatly benefit from analyzing it. He would be able to reach his full potential quickly. Izuku forced his step down, to stand still after he arrived at his destination. What stood in front of him should have left him running back home for safety, for his own life, but he couldn't bring himself to do so. The sludge monster was back, but bigger, more destructive. Half of the windows in the surrounding buildings were shattered. People were screaming, running away with their lives. The place was surrounded in fire, every corner full of smoke that made Izuku's lungs feel as if they were tightening up. He was already pretty used to smoke due to being exposed to Kaken's explosions his entire life, but it was really bad this time around. That tingly sensation was really going off now. No matter how much he wanted to run at the moment, he felt frozen in time. Every atom that built his body was telling him to move, to run away, to beg for help. The area was far away from the city. It would take a longer time for the heroes to come out and help. "Kid, move out the way. Go run." An old man yelled out to him. He was holding a frightened, crying child in his hands, with a grip so firm it couldn't possibly slip out. He had a look of worry and fear on his face as he watched the scene unfold. But he never stopped running. All these people running, and Izuku was the only one standing in the midst of it all. He watched as the villain held his hostage. He felt a tinge of guilt for them. He thought he was going to drop dead when he was caught up in his hold. Izuku's legs were shaking, he was scared, his ears were flooded with the sound of footsteps from all sorts of directions, the fire burning hot, half the surrounding buildings up in flames. All of this didn't help with his anxiety that was building up higher with every step he took. Despite the warnings he got, scared civilians telling him to run away, he moved closer. He wanted to see the victim. And he saw no other than one of the most powerful people he knew struggling. Kaken. He didn't know what snapped inside of him, but he felt as if his legs moved on his own. He didn't know why he moved. He should have ran to get help, but something about seeing him struggle made him want to go and help him, even though he knew he was most likely going to get hurt, or that he was going to get shamed for even trying, or knowing that he didn't need any help, but still he knew. He was going to save him. He had to think fast. He had to remember the basics of how he should be doing this. But he knew one thing. First, check the state of the victim. From what Izuku could tell, Kaken was exhausted, could be in risk of fainting, which could lead to the sludge monster taking over him. Not good. Second, look at his surroundings. He was practically alone at this point. There was nobody he could ask for assistance. That would be bad, although he had some plans which will require for him to be isolated in the area. So it was both a privilege and a disadvantage. There was a lot of debris scattered around, bit chunks of it as well, which was good. Really good. He had a beginning. Izuku first decided he was going to sacrifice his bag for this. He took of the heavy item that was crushing his back at school every day with how much books it weighed, but this time it would be a good idea to use it for something other than just carrying his supplies and giving him aches every time he got back home. Great, it's that brat again. The sludge monster whispered to itself as it watched Izuku run towards him. In similar fashion, Kaken did the same thing. "Deku?" he said with slight struggle creeping up in the tone his voice. And Izuku hated it. He couldn't bear to watch him struggle. He had to keep going, keeping running for him. He wasn't going to wait around and do nothing anymore. He wasn't going to be a bystander waiting for a hero anymore. He didn't know how to use his powers. He was running in blind, only using his brain. And he hoped that will be enough, because he can't stand there and just watch him die. Izuku threw the bag with all his might, which ended up hitting the villain's eye, causing him to stumble back and make an opening, and he wasn't going to waste time by any means. He saw a big piece of debris. While he was on the run, he brushed against the spotted remain and it got stuck to his hand. He watched as Kaken started to cough upon being freed from the gold of the villain, squeezing his eyes shut. Izuku knew this was his time to act. He knew his silk was strong enough to keep a guy like him in place, so he positive this would work. He stopped running and set the debris down on the ground, his hands still stuck to it. And without much thinking, he slammed his foot against the wreckage and started to pull his hand up as hard as he could, which resulted in strings to form. He was too focused to realize on how absurd all of this was. Izuku took a deep breath and started holding his breath for a moment. He snapped off the newly made strings with his free hand and grabbed back on with both, twisting the string until it became one singular web. He held it firmly as he swung it around and threw it at the sludge monster. It let out a pained screech, but to Izuku's surprise, it started using Kaken's quirk. Powerful explosions emitted from its hands and started destroying their surrounds further. Izuku crossed his forearms in front of his face to shield it from the pressure and might of the explosion, and then shortly after, kept running, using his arms to blow away the smoke to the best of his abilities. Kaken was already almost passed out, and that made Izuku run the fastest he could. "Come on. Come on," he whispered to himself in the moment of desperation. He almost fell to the ground when he arrived to his destination. He was barely holding himself together, so much adrenaline was flowing through his body. He barely knew how he was able to function so well. "Kaken!" He clawed at the sludge in desperation, trying to free him with all his might. "What the hell are you doing here, Deku?" Kaken bit out in anger at Izuku, looking down upon him. He was struggling, constantly fighting to free himself, and Izuku saw it all. He smiled, barely keeping the tears threatening to flow out of his eyes at bay. "It looked like you needed help." "I don't need your DMN help. Who do you think dash?" Before he could finish his sentence, his mouth got covered back up. Izuku was running out of ideas. From his memory of yesterday, he could recall that you would need a puncher type to be able to defeat this guy, and Izuku's abilities definitely didn't scope to defeating a monster this big. But he had to try anyway. He had to focus on speed rather than strength. If he decided to land hard punches, his fist would get jammed and then he wouldn't be able to get out. The sludge monster would be killing two birds with one stone. Izuku shut his eyes in fear and started punching desperately. They had a much stronger force, which slightly blew him off guard, but it obviously wasn't enough. He wasn't fast enough, he wasn't strong enough, he was going to fail. Kaken was going to die, both of them were, and it would be all his fault. Tears flooded his eyes as he continued to thug desperately. He couldn't stop their streaming down his face. "Kid, back up." Izuku's head whipped back as he spotted heroes and frightened civilians who must have been watching the fight. How come he didn't hear them? Was he too caught up in the fight? He watched as they rushed into the scene, securing the crowd doesn't move forward, exterminating the fires, going inside the buildings to check for more people. All sorts of stuff. Then Izuku's eyes shine with a smile he couldn't hold back. He saw him. All Might. The moment he opened his eyes, the first thing he was met with was All Might gently slapping him on the cheek. "Oh, you're awake," he said with a slight tone of relief. He was in his true form, the small, fragile, skinny one. And Izuku couldn't help but yell in fear, just to be met with a deadpan expression. "Sorry. Still not used to." "Well." He didn't finish his sentence. He shook his head and quickly regained his composure. Sitting up, getting a hold of his surroundings, he was on some sort of rooftop, not too far away from his apartment. From the looks of it, not much time has passed since he fainted, maybe only around 20 minutes or so. He let out a sigh of relief. That meant he wasn't going to be way too late home. He looked up at All Might, who stared back with a smile. He looked a bit beat up, but overall fine. Izuku wondered if that was because he carried him all the way over here or something else. It felt a bit impolite to ask, so he decided to keep his mouth shut. "You were incredible, kid." All Might's grin grew wider, brighter, and all Izuku could do was stare, and his eyes couldn't help but sparkle once more. All his love for All Might came rushing in, reminding him why he looked up to the figure in front of him so much. And he had a genuine smile on his face because of him. And he even complimented him. This was basically a dream come true. Izuku had to physically restrain himself from fanboying on the spot. "You inspired me to act. If it weren't for your bravery, I would have been just a bystander. I was past my limit, dash. I could tell. I'm so sorry." Izuku's joy quickly faltered upon the realization that he felt a wave of guilt wash over him. It was his fault, even the sludge monster escaping, it was his fault. All because he wanted to talk to All Might. What was he thinking? If it weren't for that, none of this would have happened. We might have stuck to his original plan and everything would have been okay. Only, don't interrupt me yet, young man. This is my way of saying thank you. Izuku snapped out of his frantic thinking and looked over at the man in front of him with glossy eyes, ready to spill tears at any moment. If I never say you run like that to save that boy, who knows what would have went down. How could I not bring myself to do anything after I saw a timid, young man give it his all despite knowing what danger he was in? I knew I couldn't win. I might have wasted time, or make things worse for others. I didn't really do anything to help. It was you that blew away the villain. We would have both been dead if you dash. His rambling was caught off by All Might's laughter. "Oh, young man, Do you even hear yourself? To Izuku's surprise, he sat down by him, watching the busy street, the constant chatter of the people under the sky that was ready to start heading into a bright sunset. The sky has seemingly cleared up by now. Izuku whipped his head to look at All Might, who ended up meeting his gaze. You really need to be easier on yourself. You know, most superhero stories have one thing in common: their feet moved on their own. Izuku nodded. I wasn't sure how I was going to go about it all. I just rushed in without thinking and made a plan on the move. It wasn't the best. Tell me. Well, I wanted to create an opening. I first threw my bag, and then I used a web to throw some debris that seemed big enough, and a strong enough material to blind the villain enough so I could grab Kaken and go report it to the police. Hold on, did you say web? All Might's brows furrowed in confusion as he watched Izuku continue his speech. Yesterday, I was nearby that lab incident. I didn't know it at the time, but I think the spider that escaped bit me. All Might stayed quiet for a fat minute, which only made Izuku nervous. He started to fidget with his thumbs as he stared up at the sky. This was oddly nerve-wracking. He had no idea what to expect. Will All Might think he's bluffing? Will he think he was bluffing when he told him he was quirkless? He hoped not. Izuku swallowed his fears and looked back as All Might began to speak once again. I was also quirkless. I didn't get my powers naturally. They were also an accident. Izuku's eyes shot wide open. You're telling me the greatest hero in all of Japan was born quirkless? How is this possible? Well, it can be possible considering it happened to me, but it doesn't make sense. There wasn't any news coverage or discourse about your powers and dash. Is there any discourse or coverage on yours? No. Izuku felt his cheeks heat up in embarrassment. Mine happened during a school trip. I didn't exactly get the abilities of a spider like you, but I got all my other abilities instead. Do you even know how to control them yet? His cheeks grew redder. No. All Might smiled at him. So you're telling me you ran into that fight not know what to do, nor how to use your abilities? Kid, you're insane. The last part didn't seem genuine. He chuckled upon saying it. He looked more impressed than anything, maybe even a bit surprised. I don't even know how to properly make a spider web yet. I don't even know the full scope of my newly gained quirk yet. He let out a big sigh. Gosh, I'm still so surprised to find out my favorite hero was quirkless too. Tell me about it. I never thought I was going to meet someone who gained the powers in a similar fashion to mine, let alone for them to be a kid I don't even know the name to. Izuku Midoriya. Well, young Midoriya, I have to tell you one last time, thank you. My points from earlier still stand. He paused, thinking about how to continue his speech. Young man, you too can become a hero. I'll help you in every way I can. Izuku's eyes lit up. For some odd reason, he couldn't bring himself to stop the tears forming in his eyes. I can't believe how lucky I am, he whispered to himself through his sobs. We're going to have to work on those teary eyes first, it seems. He snapped out his trance upon hearing All Might's words, and he couldn't help himself from laughing. Maybe things can get better with time. His whole life had been flipped upside down and right back up in only 2 days. He couldn't believe any of it. His heart was racing so fast, his mind was racing with so many thoughts, his body was so flooded with emotions. It made him hopeful. He looked forward to his future, to seeing who and what he'll become, especially that now he will be receiving all sorts of help by his idol, the greatest hero in all of Japan. Izuku likes getting warnings. They always assure he won't be caught off guard by something crucial to his situation. So getting not even a single heads up for what his life was about to become was pretty challenging. First, getting bit by a radioactive spider was probably the last thing on his list, and accidentally killing it with a notebook was even worse. Seriously, he's still mad at himself for that. He needed that spider for research, but it appears there will be nothing out of that anymore. Inconvenient. Turns out when you get bit and your entire anatomy changes, you really start to develop a fear of them, and in a result developing the need to kill the second you lay your eyes on one. Psychology is really weird, he has to admit. And to nobody's surprise, Izuku had absolutely no idea how to control his newly gained quirk. Despite All Might's constant help and advice, Izuku couldn't figure out how to make his webs form one singular unit. Sure, he could do the same thing he had done for the sludge villain, But nobody was going to wait around for him to tie all those strings into one single strand. If he were to sign up for a contest with the title of World's Unluckiest Lucky Man, he would definitely win first place without a singular doubt. It didn't help much that majority of the start of his progress was made during his not-so-convenient punishment for being late that one night, which forced him and his newly gained mentor to train on video rather than seeing each other eye to eye, which didn't help a lot with making Izuku realize his mistakes and fix them without much issues. But worse, he was forced to deal with the embarrassment of All Might seeing his room in all of its fanboy glory. He doesn't quite want to mention that. The rest of their training time during spring break was spent during the night on the beach. Every night, Izuku would train not only his physical body. Despite the enhancements, he still had to see how far he can push himself. But also, very obviously, his powers, as previously mentioned. It proved to be a difficult obstacle to overcome. He was able to solve everything. The sticking, which apparently wasn't caused by his web fluid like he originally thought. This is exactly why he regrets killing that spider and accidentally ruining one of his notebooks. He needed that research badly. Using his web fluid willingly, but never to figure out how to shoot it out into one singular line. So of course they had to come up with something new, something different. I don't know how I'm going to get back home on time. Oh God, I'm gonna get grounded again, aren't I? Izuku hid his face with the palms of his hands, pacing around through the beach in circles in a form of letting out the stress building up within his body with every passing second. I'm dead. It was nice knowing you All Might, but I will most likely get grounded again. He said his farewell, waving his arms around, then shoving them right back into the pockets of his shorts. He was basically already a dead man. There was no way he was going to be able to train himself on time for the entrance exam if he trains at the old pace again. All Might let out a laugh. Young Midoriya, did you forget you can climb walls? Izuku stopped his panicked frenzy in a matter of seconds. He looked up at the skinny figure in front of him. Then it clicked in his head. Right? I completely forgot. He laughed nervously as his cheeks heated up to a bright red that screamed embarrassment in bold letters. You've been quite busy with school, no wonder you're losing your mind. He joked, patting Izuku on the back. He seemed understanding of Izuku's struggles, even though he never spoke anything about them out loud. We should get going, it's quite the late hour. Right. Izuku swallowed uncomfortably. I haven't been all that focused lately, this is all so new to me, I still need time to get used to it. I have to work harder than others because I started out late. I need to catch up to everyone and prove that I'm capable too. All Might smiled. That's the spirit. He gave one last pat to Izuku's back and he started to walk by the shore, looking up at the sky. Izuku followed behind with a small jog to catch up, unbothered by the sand that was flying everywhere. Just don't fall too deep into it all, you're going to lose yourself otherwise. I won't, I promise. Izuku smiled back and gave a reassuring nod. I was thinking of your little web issue, and I thought of maybe asking someone to craft you a support dash. A support item is genius. I thought of the same thing, but I wasn't exactly sure if it was up to me to ask for such a favor. Izuku chuckled as he took his hands out his pockets and waved them around as he spoke. I still don't think it's in my right to request something like, well that. I thought of doing it on my own if I can't get everything right by the end of spring break. And the end of spring break is basically by the corner. So I think I'm going to do it on my own. Izuku started his ramble, his voice dripping with enthusiasm, and he explained a part of his thoughts out loud. He spoke with his hands moving along with his words. Are you sure, young Midoriya? It isn't a problem for me dash, All Might started, but was never able to finish due to Izuku cutting him off with a bright smile, full of life. I'm positive, I can do it if I try hard enough. So they had to settle down with Plan B, which was creating a support item. Although there was one problem, Izuku set himself up for failure. He has never crafted something so complex. Obviously, he has engaged in making little cardboard or paper figures when he was little, but that was the most he had done. His best engineering skills are based on fixing his mother's car. So it's safe to say he actually has no idea what he was doing. God knows where his brain cells took a trip to after he almost failed that one test. Izuku feels as if half intelligence evaporated. But the truth is, he was just tired and distracted. Even though he had all the time in the world, surprisingly enough, not getting enough sleep and training majority of the nights isn't the most convenient combination in the world. But there was another thing holding him back. He wasn't all capable, he was well aware of that. How couldn't he be? That's basically what everyone has been telling him his whole life. So he did what any sane person would do. He booted up a tutorial on how to make a shooter, watched it, and decided to try everything out on his own. On his not very organized desk, he had a pair of gloves, a bunch of random materials he received from All Might after their last meet, and a bunch of tiny microneedles, the type you'd see on a derma roller. Although an odd choice, he knew the exact thing he needed to do with them. Izuku took out his notebook and flipped through the pages covered in ash from explosions. Katsuki's explosions. He paused, then let out an annoyed sigh and kept flipping through the pages till he found the first ones without any of his scribbled thoughts. He started writing down his plan. It was quite simple, even so he still knew he was going to have slight troubles with achieving his exact goal. The microneedles were going to go inside of the glove. Their use is to gather his web fluid. It probably wasn't the most ethical choice and it will hurt, but there's not much he can do about it. He didn't really have any other ideas that would work as fast as this would. The fluid was going to be gathered at the base of his wrist, then he can push a button to shoot his webs out. It was a slightly tacky web shooter, to cut the story short. Izuku looked at his crammy, jumbled up handwriting with a feeling of pride. It was a decently crafted plan, and he knew it was a good base for possible and very likely future upgrades. He set his pen down and set all his resources in front of him, and got to work, completely unaware of how much of a challenge this actually was. The start was already hard. He was basically forced to rip the pair of gloves apart to get his contraption to work. First thing he did was to follow the first step of his plan. He used a hot glue gun to connect the microneedles and called it a day, since he didn't know any other genius way to tie it all together while still keeping its durability intact. He wasn't quite fond of it, since he kept burning himself on accident, and a small bit of hygienic concerns, but he held his composure. He knew he had to do this. That wasn't the hardest part, although the hardest part was getting the tiny tubes connected to the needles. He grew frustrated with every slip-up, with every miss, with every failed attempt to get them to stick in place. It was hard. The only thing that he was seemingly good at was stitching the pipes to the glove. He found the stitching part to be quite easy. But the worst part was definitely not only building the additional parts and adding them all on, connecting everything and such, but having to do everything twice. So when Izuku was near the end, he felt as if heaven was grazed upon him. "Come on," he said with frustration bleeding into his voice as he cut open a small hole to pull through the trigger to the lower half of his palm. He looked at his new creation in awe. Beads of sweat rolled down his face from hard work. "That was fast," he said, panting. Looking over at the clock, he shortly realized it was not fast by any means. It was middle of the bare night. He started at 6 in the afternoon. He worked on 2 gloves for 7 hours. His eyes popped wide open in shock. The last thing he expected was to see that it was the middle of the night. But that wasn't exactly a bad thing. That only screamed more privacy to him. He practically flew out his chair, holding his excitement back for the sake of not waking up his mother. She was tired, long day at work. He didn't want to disturb her. She should rest. He didn't want to push her any further, or to accidentally drain her more. Being careful to not be too loud, he shot his first web with a single thwip of a button-like trigger. His heart began to race from an overwhelming joy. The singular web splattered on the wall as proof that his contraption actually worked and that he wasn't going crazy made Izuku squeal in excitement. His hard work paid off really well. Sure, the needles hurt a bit, but he can handle a bit of pain for the sake of this much control. He shot another one, but instantly grabbed on. It was a sturdy, strong, singular web. His smile was practically out of this world. He didn't expect it to work. It was the last thing he expected. He let go, not too worried about the webs splattered on his wall. They dissolve in an hour, Izuku thought to himself. He learned that when he accidentally stuck his phone to the ceiling once, there's no need to question how that happened. He stared down at the gloves. They were a bit tacky, sure, but they worked really well. And for a beginner, they worked perfectly, so he wasn't going to start complaining. Izuku walked over to his window. It had slight stains all over it, but for the majority, it was clean, and that was good enough. He opened the window to his room, and oh, his room. He needed to clean it up. It had all sorts of items scattered across his desk and floor. It looked like a wreck. He wasn't the type to be messy. In fact, he is always quite organized, so seeing the dumpster fire his room was currently in slightly irked him. He decided to not pay attention to that at the moment, but rather focus on the beauty of the night. He breathed in the fresh air and looked outside on the street. It was a quiet time, not a single soul to be seen, and that excited him. An empty street was exactly one of the few things he's looking forward to. He took a step forward, but then a step back. He remembered something crucial he needed to do for this to be as optimized as possible. Just for a minute, he turned his back to leave his room, tiptoeing through the halls, being careful to not make too much sound. He got in front of the door to his mother's room. It got polished recently. You would assume it's brand new even though it has been through all sorts of tears and Izuku's god-awful drawing skills. He slowly pulled the doorknob and gave a small peek to his mother's room with a light pull of the door. She was peacefully sleeping in a full-sized bed, tucked underneath the covers. Nothing seemed to possibly be disturbing her, not even Izuku watching her from afar. He nodded in consideration. She won't be waking up anytime soon. He closed the gap he created by opening door with great care, hoping it won't make too much noise, and thankfully it didn't. With one swift sprint, he got back to his room. Locking the door, he turned back to stare out the window. Nobody was going to see him. Izuku took a deep breath, and he slowly started to climb out the window. The soft air blew in his direction. It was quite warm out. He wasn't going to go out yet though. He first needed to see what his following course of actions will look. He looked around the city. All sorts of buildings and places were made here. From stuff like small coffee shops to big corporational buildings. And that's when he spotted it. There was a relatively tall building nearby, and that was going to be his target. He let a light smile creep up onto his face. He quickly climbed back in, running to his closet as if he was in the biggest rush of the world. It had light chips here and there, but it was still in a good condition. And he basically raided it. He looked all over the place for clothes appropriate for the night, swiping through the racks with great speed. He knew he had to find some new clothes to wear since he knew well he wasn't going to swing around with his face out for any random villain to see, and his all-might pajamas, that is. After a short amount of time, he found some pants, a hoodie, a mask, and some fully black goggles. He looked a bit like he was going to plan and rob a bank. This should be good enough, Izuku said with a smile on his face. Despite the uncomfortable vibe it radiated, it seemed perfect. It was a good balance of safety and comfort. Only thing that was a slight inconvenience was the fact that a hoodie was probably too hot for a night like this, but what can he do? He quickly changed out of his clothes, making sure to not just scatter them. He didn't have the nerves needed to clean up a mess that big. He folded up his pajamas and tucked them under his pillow. He was going to come back to their warmth and comfort of them soon. But now he was going to train, but not in the prior fashion. He was going to try something new, something better. And that something was going to be amazing. With one last thug, he put on the goggles that darkened his vision and ran out his room and jumped out the window, being quick to stick to the wall in front of him. He let out a shaky sigh. No matter how many times he does this, it still shakes him up every time. He slowly started the crawl up, looking at the top of his apartment complex. It was a bit old, but it survived all sorts of crazy events. With each grab of his arms, he grew more confident. He felt sure of himself, even though there were still severe doubts. He had the strength to keep going, to keep climbing. And he did. Each step brought him closer to the top, and when it did, he wasn't afraid to look down on the street. What did make him slightly scared was the fact the building he originally spotted was quite far. If he failed, he dies. And Izuku didn't really like the possibility of that. But he wasn't going to dwell on that further. Bad thoughts. He wasn't going to focus on them. Simple as that. He took a deep breath. Okay, Izuku, you can do it, just stay calm. You're close enough, the web will hit the building and you will not die. He reassured himself with words that felt like lies even to his own ears. With trembling hands he shot out a test web, instantly clinging onto it. His eyes slightly widened in surprise upon realizing that he actually did land his shot. He stared at the string that stayed connected to the target, not daring to nudge or fall off while he held a firm grip. Yes. He cheered with an overwhelming joy coursing through his veins. He didn't feel any incoming danger, he was safe. His body was telling him he was safe. He can trust himself, right? His very explosive excitement was cut short since he realized where he was headed. Now was the hard part, the part that took actual dedication. He let himself get absorbed into the moment. He was going to do this, he can do this. He will do this. There's no going back now, he had this on his mind ever since he started training and it was time. This was his test, the test of his capabilities, the test that will prove to him if all of this time was a waste. Even though it wasn't much, he knew if he failed this, it wasn't worth it. So he let go. He took a leap off the building with a small step off the edge. The entire course of his situation changed. He was suddenly swinging through the air with incredible speeds. Ones that made him feel like he could catch up even to the most skilled of heroes. He felt the air course through him, flowing against his body as if it were a part of him. The excitement of practically flying through the air made him smile in surprise. He held onto his web tightly, as if it was his one sole purpose. He thought he was going to be scared, and it felt logical he never swung in the air, let alone at a height this big, but it was quite the opposite. He felt amazing. The feeling of freedom was practically at his fingertips. He couldn't believe what was happening. His lungs felt as if they were out of air. The excitement and at the same time adrenaline was eating him whole. Especially now that he was going to bump into a bunch of random windows. Out of panic, Izuku let go of his web and started to far. He shut his eyes instinctively. He felt his body coursing through the air, falling down. His joy quickly faded away as he mindlessly shot his webs and clung onto them in a moment of desperation to not meet his impending doom. That was until he felt one of them actually hit a target. With one swing of his weight, he was back in the air, at a much smaller height. Sure, nothing near to what he was dealing with earlier, but he was still up there. He was still going, he was still alive. He let out a loud sigh of relief. He really thought he was going to die there for a second. He looked around, he was still going relatively fast, but now he wanted to land. He really needed a second to just lay down and breathe. He let go of the web again. Fear caught him once more, but he quickly swiped another web, which ended up clinging onto a random part of the city, and he swung in the direction of the lower buildings, waiting until he was above them. He felt as if he was actually getting the hang of this. He let go of his web, but this time he prepared for the fall. It wasn't too deep, but he knew it was going to hurt. One thing that soothed his mental pain was the fact he knew he had an endurance much higher than your average person. So when he landed on his torso, he wasn't met with much issues aside from a sharp pain. He stuck his arm under his hoodie, checking for broken ribs just to not find any. He was safe. He let out a big sigh and rolled onto the ground. He was going to need to practice landing. With slow breaths, he looked up at the sky. Tough night. Izuku thought to himself as he let his pain slowly pass. The burning sensation of his chest, the stinging of his entire torso, he was going to let it all fade away with time. It was nice to not worry about injury as much as before. He was quite used to worrying if any of his peers left any more severe injury onto his body. He didn't want his mother to notice something like that. Right, no bad thoughts. Who would have guessed he would actually survive that fall without breaking a rib, or even worse, something like his spine? He would have been in the hospital for days. He's quite happy and felt relatively relieved upon realizing he in fact wasn't dealing with any severe injuries. He would have hoped he died right then and there if he was. But he quickly jolted out of his semi-calm state when he heard explosions. But also a very, very familiar voice. It was Katsuki. Izuku got up as fast as he could. His shock basically jolted him awake. He followed the direction of the sound carefully. He ran to the edge of the place he landed at and looked down, careful to not fall. He wasn't in a mood to hurt himself more than he already did. And he didn't feel like possibly ending up in a hospital. He clung onto his chest, more specifically one of the rib areas, as an attempt to slightly weaken his pain as he observed him. He was yelling in his usual fashion, typical of Katsuki. There was no surprise from Izuku when it comes to that. He was more confused on why Katsuki was awake at this hour, let alone outside. He was quite known for following a strict schedule, not to mention never breaking it. His entire family teased him about going to bed at 8 rather than a later time. Even though they haven't been proper friends for a pretty handful amount of years, he still knew small facts like these. They were childhood friends, after all. Even when Katsuki didn't quite like him, they still always spent time together. They were basically glued to each other's hips, even though they never were close enough to say that line in a way that was a full truth. "I'll if he kill you, BT. Give it back." Katsuki said with surging anger in his tone. One of his hands held a tight grip to a man's collar, while the other was sparking with small explosions, seemingly proposing a threat to the man in front of him. He looked furious, and that scared Izuku. He felt a small wave of guilt and frustration wash over him. Why couldn't he just leave people alone? The poor man in front of him probably didn't do anything. He knew Katsuki had a tendency to be a bit aggressive, but attacking people in the middle of the night wasn't really a smart idea. He had to do something. Izuku knew he had to do something. He wanted to help both him and Katsuki, and he knew he was going to be able to do it. He had a mask covering face. There's nothing he had to fear. And yet, when he took that leap and pushed them away from each other, his knees were shaking so bad he looked like he was going to collapse any minute. "What is your problem?" "That guy mugged me, damn it. I almost had him." Katsuki yelled out. Explosions erupted out of his hands with much higher intensity, and they made Izuku flinch. He took a step back, and Katsuki took a step forward and grabbed Izuku too, which made him yelp in surprise. His nervousness was rising, but he kept his composure. What surprised him, though, was the fact Katsuki wasn't actually in the wrong, oddly enough. Getting mad over someone trying to steal something from you is a pretty valid reaction. Maybe he just read it wrong. Izuku knew he wasn't in the wrong for thinking so either. He started, but never finished, as he was shortly cut off by Katsuki after. "Shut your trap before I blast you all the way to hell." Izuku let out a nervous sigh. He was already used to this, but he still couldn't hold back the fear coursing through his veins, ready to bite him at any moment. He knew he was going to get blasted with Katsuki's typical, powerful blast that would sting his shoulders for days. He shut his eyes and prepared for the blow, but it never came. "Sheet," Katsuki said to himself as he watched the same man who he was fighting a second ago run away happily. And that just made his frustration with Izuku grow even deeper. He turned to look at him. They were oddly close, and for some reason that made Izuku feel a lot more nerve-wracked than before. Emotions are odd. "What were you thinking? That didn't even concern you and your ski instructor looking, but still decided to get all up in my business, huh?" He pushed Izuku away with a small explosion. It didn't hurt, which surprised Izuku a lot. "I'm sorry, I thought you were robbing him, K-." He stopped his apology for a microsecond. He can't quite call him Kaken now, could he? His cover would be blown the day he got it. So he went with an alternative: avoid saying his name at all costs. "Kind man," Izuku said with very wobbly confidence. He purposely lowered the pitch to his voice, just so he wasn't too recognizable. And thankfully he was met with no comments on it. "I don't need your pity. Stop wasting my time, I need to catch that guy." Katsuki turned away and basically flew himself forward with his explosions, flying through the air like a natural, and Izuku watched in awe. No matter how unpleasant he may be sometimes, he truly was amazing. While Izuku was out here almost breaking his ribs, Katsuki was already catching criminals. While Izuku was doing anything, Katsuki was already doing something better. No matter how much he may be hated by Katsuki, to the point he feels as if every bone of his body despises him, Izuku can't help but admire everything about him. And that's why he wanted to be by his side. Izuku pointed his hand at a building nearby, and with a single thwip, he clung on and started running. He let himself gain momentum. With each step of his foot on the ground, he felt himself becoming faster and faster, fast enough to jump as high as he could, shoot another web and start swinging. He was still a bit rusty, since he wasn't used to this, but he was going to catch up. He knew he had to. He wanted to help him out. He felt quite guilty. Maybe he shouldn't judge a book by its cover next time. That's a thing he'll have to keep in mind moving onward. Katsuki's head swung to look behind him. "What is your but doing here? Are you following me?" His eyes were full of rage as he kept flying through the air, and Izuku could only smile. He couldn't believe he was by him. Sure, he wasn't right at his side, but he was close to Katsuki, which is quite the shock to him. If he didn't have a mask to cover his face, they would be God knows where. "I don't need your help, I told you already, dickhead." get your ears checked. Katsuki spat out with annoyance. He turned his attention back to the criminal he was chasing, and Izuku had to do the same. But that didn't stop either of them from talking. Who do you think you are anyway? His voice was filled with sass as he spoke, and all Izuku could do was ignore it. I'm the man's spider, he said with slight happiness. He thought the secret made-up-on-the-spot name was quite clever, since he was positive he would have died right then and there if he said his actual name to Katsuki of all people. All right, Spider-Man, get the hell out my way. He sent an explosion in his way, which Izuku barely dodged. His spider sense saved him thankfully. It did slightly catch him off guard for some reason. That's not my name, he yelled out. I don't f***ing care about your name extra. Let me handle this, you idiot, stop wasting my time. He shouted as he finally caught up to the man, and so did Izuku, but he kept his distance. He watched closely as Katsuki basically jumped the guy, although that did create an opening for Izuku to act. He took his lucky shot, and with a singular web he was able to retrieve Katsuki's wallet. He smiled with pride. I got it. Give it back, extra. Katsuki yelled out, and Izuku shot it right back at him, and he caught it without any problems. He didn't want to cause any extra problems, so it was best he just gave it back from a distance. The man was gone. He ran away. Katsuki muttered to himself all sorts of words in frustration, and Izuku decided that no matter how much he wanted to help, it was better he wasn't a part of that. No matter how much it ached him that he wasn't going to do anything, he didn't think it was a smart idea to irritate Katsuki further. It would only make things worse. That's one thing he learned after the sludge villain attack. Even though he helped him out, he was still met with an angry Katsuki that day that followed him home. They were right in front of his apartment building when he had Katsuki say the words that remained in his mind even though he knows they shouldn't have. You didn't help me, you got that? I was fine on my own. You did nothing, get a hold of yourself. So he knew it was best not to push it, not now. He didn't have enough of a base for that. He had to figure something out soon. So, with slight disappointment in himself, he said his goodbye. See you around? Sir. Shut your mouth, damn it, I don't want to hear a word come out your mouth again. Katsuki spat out in anger. Izuku took that as his cue to leave. He sighed sadly as he leaped back home. By the time he back where he was supposed to be this entire time, it was roughly around 3. He was mad with himself. He didn't even ask the questions he wanted to. He wanted to know why he was out so late, why he needed his wallet with him, what he was doing until then. He had so many racing thoughts he knew he wasn't going to get an answer to because it's not like he can just come up to him in the middle of school hours and ask something so private, let alone someone who most definitely despises him. He would blow his newly, accidentally gained cover as well. That wasn't something he can afford, not now. He took out a pair of bandages and started wrapping his hands in them. Turns out having small needles poke into your skin for an hour or two wasn't the most comfortable thing for your body. He made sure to be gentle, the slight aches in his palm were telling him to do so. He took it slow, no rush, a complete change of pace compared to the last few hours. He looked around his room, it was a complete mess. His disguise was basically shoved into the closet without even making an attempt to fold it all. The only thing that was nice and organized was his bed, the thing he couldn't wait to lay his head on and just rest. It was a tiring night. He was exhausted both physically and mentally. All he wanted was some rest, just to close his eyes for a moment and forget why he was alive in the first place. He never felt more connected to the anguish his mother goes through every day after coming back from work than now. But he also couldn't wait to wake up tomorrow and reorganize his entire room. He couldn't stand the mess. Not only was his room a mess, but he himself was a whole catastrophe. He felt extremely petty about the whole thing. His first interaction with Katsuki where he wasn't making fun of him was held this night. If we don't count the ski instructor comment and a couple of insults here and there. You know what, maybe he should just quit this sentence. And he didn't even have the nerve to ask the most basic of questions. He sighed in anger as he got up to his bed, snuggled underneath the warmth of his covers and buried his face into his pillow. He let out an elongated sigh. He was beyond frustrated in himself. He had no idea on what to do. Although he was quite happy with what he achieved, he was able to retrieve a stolen wallet. The feeling of doing a good deed always cheered him up a bit, Even though he originally made the mistake of separating them, he was still able to do the right thing in the end. Maybe he was made to solve issues like this, not to be a grand hero fighting off the big bad. Maybe he was always meant to be a street hero. All Might himself is technically considered a street hero now. And for some reason, waiting for the UA entrance exam only seemed like just another step he had to take to his heroism, not the beginning. Because he knew what he was going to do. He knew what he was going to make his purpose. Even though he knows he wasn't able to do much with Katsuki, he knows there will always be a new day. Maybe he was going to see Katsuki again. Actually, there was no maybe, there's only a will. He knew he was going to see Katsuki again, not at school, but as a vigilante, as Spider-Man. He was going to become a hero, even though he knew that he didn't even have a provisional hero license yet. Usually, he wouldn't make a choice so extreme so soon, but something in his brain shifted. First, he knew a lot about vigilantism. He learned all sorts of small facts about it from spending hours on social media researching heroism in general. The most important thing to note was the fact quirkless people don't get the same treatment by law enforcement when it comes to something like that. Quirkless people, compared to those with quirks, get severely smaller punishments, a lot of times almost none. And Izuku could use the fact he's registered as quirkless as an advantage, something to use for his benefit. He knew it wasn't right, but then again, this is law we're talking about. There's all sorts of injustice around the world, and Japan wasn't an exception. But then again, it isn't just that. Something about seeing the person who he has been looking up to his entire life do something so out the ordinary like not follow the rules, made it feel as if it were okay for him to do the same. Something about them chasing the same villain together made him feel oddly happy. It reminded him of their experiences when they were little kids, when they would play heroes every day. He would do anything to relive that time of his life. Everything felt perfect, something he hasn't felt in a while. Maybe, in the near future, they could make that a reality. They could be heroes together. Just the two of them. Izuku tapped his pen against the half-written page of lazily written notes. A bunch of doodles and scribbles, random notes filled up the lines of the paper, rather than the neatly written material on the board. All of the noise, all the pens and pencils writing was still slightly irritating for him, but it's not like he can do much about it aside from get used to it all. The board turned into a mere background blur as he started to shift his attention towards drawing once more. He has thought a lot about what his suit should look like. Obviously. He can't go around with goggles, a hoodie, and a mask and call it a day. Nobody would take him serious or even guess he's a hero. He'd look more like a robber more than anything. He needs something that will hide his identity well enough, but also be eye-catching. Maybe he could add a cape? No, that wouldn't fit his style. Maybe he could take inspiration from the spider that bit him? It was multicolored after all. It would be smart to pick that as a color scheme. Shame he can't base the hero costume on its abilities he never got to learn. He still feels very petty about that. Then again, he is officially, not really, more so in his head, called Spider-Man thanks to Kaken's great idea of purposely calling him that rather than the man-spider. Spider-Man has more of a ring to it anyway. Since his name should match his costume, he should definitely add spider-like themes, like a web pattern or multiple limbs and eyes, but that would be pretty hard to make. Besides, it would be just for show, and that shouldn't be his main focus. He doesn't want to be flashy, he wants to be simple, but eye-catching enough to the point if someone spotted him in danger, they could recognize him and call out for help. He hasn't got the base idea of the costume down. A baggy costume would be inconvenient. Any sort of villain would be able to grab him by his clothes and swing him around like a hair tie around a finger. So tight clothes are a must. There's also the problem of footwear. Just a fabric and nothing else would hurt his feet pretty bad whenever he would walk, so he would have to wear shoes. But then again, that could make his suit look tacky. On the other hand, once again, a lot of heroes wear shoes in their costumes, so that isn't off the table yet. His racing thoughts quickly got shut down with a small tingle in the back of his skull, which was shortly followed hit of a palm directed right to his head, and he would recognize that small ache to his skull to be the teacher's hand. Midoriya, your mumbling is distracting the class. I doubt that you'll be let into UA if you don't start taking things seriously. His teacher pointed out, which caused the class to laugh in a mocking fashion, and Izuku could only ignore them. Sorry sir, I'll get back to my schoolwork. he said with a slight awkwardness bleeding into his tone as he spoke. His cheeks turned a light red, calling out his embarrassment directly. Izuku pretended to write down whatever was on the board, but then none other than Katsuki caught his attention. Izuku had to point out, Katsuki has definitely, without a doubt, left him alone. Ever since he was able to save him from the sludge monster, he grew distant, more than ever before. But it wasn't as bad as he thought it was going to be. Although he still does not like him, not in the slightest, and that is pretty obvious to Izuku given how whenever they do talk, he still receives a rather rude response. The worst of it all is still being called Deku. That's how he knows. He only can dream of it meaning anything different other than useless. Izuku sighed and looked away, slightly embarrassed about the fact he didn't even notice himself staring at Katsuki right while he was lost in his train of thoughts. He's just glad he didn't notice. That would have been pretty awkward. Izuku flipped a new page and started properly writing down the notes. But his mind was thinking all sorts of things. What if Kaken knew that it was him that he spoke to yesterday? I mean, he had to. There's no way his attempt at a deep voice actually did anything. In his humble opinion, it was pretty obvious. He knew he can lower his pitch and actually sound decent, but to him it's not identity hiding levels of change. And that gave him a good idea. A voice changer. He could possibly build it in on the inner layer of his mask, and then whenever he would speak it would shift the tone of his voice. Genius. How he didn't think of that sooner. A small smile crept up to his face. He felt oddly proud of himself. Sure, he has felt proud of himself a lot recently, from his mother praising him as if he were a superior being on this earth, to All Might telling him he did great after any sort of training. Maybe his life isn't as bad as he thought it was going to be. He always knew a reason to stay will come around, and it did. It always does. That's why he can always get back up. Right, voice changer. It is a smart idea. If Katsuki knew that was him yesterday, then when he makes his debut as Spider-Man he might not know. Maybe he'll assume it's just a coincidence that a vigilante with the ability to shoot out webs showed up out of the blue after he gave another random who also tries to stop crime that exact same name. But then again, he doesn't know for sure. Knowing Kaken, he definitely would have called me out. Izuku turned to look out the window, just to get a glimpse of the clear skies calling out to him. Only if he was outside swinging from building to building than being stuck in one, that would have been great, perfect even. Things would be simple. The bell rang, and Izuku practically bolted out of class, not waiting behind for anyone, except for taking a moment to watch Katsuki from afar. He packed his stuff into his bag rather aggressively. Some would say he was practically shoving them in. He seemed slightly more irritated than usual, and Izuku could assume it was the mugging. He would ask just to be sure, but he knows no answer would be given. He could only sigh and walk away. Every time he walked away the tingling guilt would manifest inside of him, and it was hard to ignore. His entire body was aching, screaming for him to do something to help. But his brain was telling him otherwise. He needs to think with his head. This wasn't a situation where he can just jolt in to save him without a single thought otherwise. Maybe a fresh start is what they need. No better way to get it than hiding his identity and pretending to be someone else. He always wished things turned out different. He knows they could have. Maybe if he told him that he wasn't quirkless anymore, things would be different. But he can't. Revealing his identity to anyone would be a danger to him and his mom. He doesn't want to endanger her. She already worries about him enough. There's a reason known vigilantes always wore a mask and hid their true identity. Izuku was no exception to that. He was well aware this choice wasn't the best one, that it was led by his urge to make things better, a rather strong emotion. He always wanted to make the world smile, to ensure everyone is safe in their skin, to not have to worry at night that something might happen to them because of a crazed lunatic running through the street. He stepped outside the gates, staring down at the pavement beneath him, lost in thought, mostly about his suit. Izuku would have asked if All Might could request someone to make it this time around, considering the time he spent on his gloves, but he decided not to tell him about his plan. Heroes are pretty strict about following the law, especially when it comes to vigilantes. Despite them doing the same thing. Heroes protect the people, vigilantes protect the people. Simple as that. He doesn't understand why they were seen as such a target in the community. It honestly saddened him considering the path he was going to head down towards. He hopes he will be able to gain the respect of the people around him in the field when he joins. With a blink of an eye he was already home. His body was starting to surge with excitement and nervousness. The thought of working on his suit was making him practically eating him alive. He stepped inside and greeted his mother with a smile, taking off his shoes while she came over to see him with a sweet smile upon seeing her son. "Hi honey. How was school today? Are you feeling tired?" Inko spoke in her usual relaxed tone that carried a ring of energy to it. Izuku smiled. "Not really, quite the opposite actually." "Oh, is that so?" Inko's voice was laced in joy. It was rare for her son to feel good after coming back. They were both aware of that, hence why Izuku didn't feel threatened to tell her anything yet. "Yeah. I mean, I've been doing better than before spring break. My classmates have been a lot nicer to me, kind of. It's just been okay." Inko smiled at him as she listened to him speak, offering a hand to take his backpack, which shortly after ended up grabbing onto the strap. It was pretty torn up from the sludge villain attack, but Izuku refused to get a new one, proclaiming it was special to him. There wasn't much she was able to do about that. "It could be better than now, sure, but I wouldn't ask for more." "Something is better than nothing," Izuku said with a slight giggle to finish off his sentence in a less depressing manner. "Has Katsuki been treating you any better?" "I know I shouldn't ask, but I'm curious." Inko took his hand into his, locking their gazes firmly. It made Izuku's stomach twist from nervousness, but he swallowed his fears and managed to speak out loud. "Oh, yes, actually." "Really?" Inko raised an eyebrow, seemingly surprised by the statement. "We just don't talk anymore. He avoids me." The once cheerful tone had a shaky feel to it now. He was leaving his comfort zone, and Inko could tell. "It's okay, Izuku." She pushed one of his hair strands behind his ear with a comforting smile. Izuku couldn't help but smile back. "Thanks, Mom." They let go of each other's hands. He stepped over to the hallway with the intentions of going to get changed, but Inko stopped him. "Wait, Izuku, I want to talk about something." She took a deep breath, preparing herself. "I wanted to apologize." She started fidgeting with her fingers, but still managing to keep her eyes focused on Izuku, and he did so too. He didn't feel like it was right to take off his gaze from hers, not yet. He did feel his heart rate take a very swift rise. A shaky yet genuine smile caused by the slight surprise he felt crept up on his face. "For what? You haven't done anything." "I sometimes feel as if I stress you out." "It's never my intention to do so. I know I worry a lot and that it might not help you out most of the time. I just want you to know that I know you're struggling and I want to help you. I'm here whenever you need me, Izuku." Izuku's brows furrowed in a twinge of guilt, his eyes getting glossy from the thin layer of tears forming inside of them. "Anna, just don't worry about it. I promise I'm fine, I understand you." With heavy footsteps, he came over to her and slouched his back to hug her, and she didn't pull back. She didn't even hesitate to return one either. His shoulders dropped from the loss of the tense feeling cluttering up his throat till he felt like he couldn't breathe. Not a single bone inside his body dared to move. He knew he wasn't going to move until she did. They stayed intertwined together for a couple minutes before Inko let go, wiping her tears. She put on a smile as she spoke. "Well, I know you're probably hungry, sweetie. Go get dressed, I'll serve lunch." "Sure thing. Can I stay up a bit tonight? I want to work on a project." She turned around and stopped mid-walk. "What are you working on?" The tense feeling came back to attack him again. Out of instinct he started pulling on the collar of his uniform as he spoke with a slightly shaky voice. "Just be boring school stuff." Izuku could practically hear the dishonesty in his voice, but he had to hope his mother wouldn't hear the same. And she didn't seem to notice. "I'll stop by to give you some snacks later. I don't want my boy working on a project without something to munch on." Izuku let out an amused laugh. "Oh, come on. There's no need. If I want to eat something, I thankfully have the ability to get the food myself, but thank you anyway. Just don't get all jumbled and caught up in your work like that one time you had to do that chemistry project." He let out a groan of embarrassment, which was shortly after followed with a smile. "Don't remind me of that. You're so lame." He turned around and started walking to his room, feeling the comfort practically bounce off the walls, and he heard his mother laugh at his childish comment. He stepped inside his room, taking a second to admire his hard work. It has been going through quite the cleanup. Sure, it's still a bit messy, but it's as good as it can be, especially when it's the same area you train your not so naturally gained powers. He still hasn't told anyone, and now on top of that he's going to have a brand new secret to keep close to his chest, deep inside his heart. Izuku sighed with exhaustion. Maybe all he needed was a nice, good meal from his mother to chase away the bad thoughts cluttering up his mind. When he sat down at the table, he could practically die from the smell of a nice, freshly cooked meal. His inner prayers have been answered. I think I'm going to pass out. This is actually amazing. He wiped fake tears from the corners of his eyes. Better be careful, Izuku. She laughed. I will. Come on, you know me. Wait, have you been working on any hero analysis? It's out the ordinary for you not to mention anything. Izuku paused. All his recent notes have been about his upcoming suit, his gloves, training tips from All Might, schedule changes. Sure, there were a bit of hero notes here and there, but nothing worth talking about. All he could do is give her a smile of slight embarrassment as his cheeks took on a slight pink color. Not really, he scratched the back of his head awkwardly. He's been busy with balancing out sleep, training, and school all at the same time that he had been neglecting the thing he loves doing the most. But then again, he has been doing a thing related to that exact same, so frankly, he had no clue why he felt oddly nervous about it all. After lunch wrapped up, he spent a bit of time to show his mother some of his small side inventions, just to get used to making equipment, and she loved them. Her approval always made him feel better about himself. So right after that, the first thing he got to doing when he was in his room was sketching out the final design for his suit. It was a lot harder than he imagined. Izuku scratched the back of his head rather aggressively as he got on board with his doodling, which he wasn't all that hyped about due to the annoyance upon hearing his pencil scribble his paper. He mumbled to himself as he kept drawing. He wasn't the most skillful guy around, his anatomy always had a wrong ring to it, he always found a way to accidentally smudge the paper and create an ugly smear across his drawing, or something similar to having shaky lines which leads to erasing the paper so much you just have to completely start over due to them getting engraved into the art like a stain. Then there's random accidents caused by his lack of focus, like that one time he drank paint water on accident, or when he accidentally used his clothes to clean his brushes rather than wipes and tissue. He liked drawing, it's just that there's a lot inconveniences which end up bothering him more than needed. This process was by no means an exception. Izuku groaned in frustration as he erased his paper once more. He didn't like the eye shape he drew, so instead he went with outlined lenses. He was going to dwell on materials and possible support factors much later. There wasn't really any need to figure out what material would be most efficient for doing something as blocking out sunlight and dust, not while he was in early stages. Scribbling on the paper, he slowly drew a logo which was just a simple, fresh-looking spider placed right in the middle of his chest. He smiled at himself with pride. He couldn't believe he was actually going to be doing all of this. So when he got to the actual suit making, Izuku could swear he would collapse to the ground and choke. He was whispering to himself while he worked. With every stitch he made a comment on how it could have been better. With every craft created by his hands he would get washed over by a feeling of pride. The voice changer was incredibly hard to make. A lot of tiny pieces and bits had to be formed into one with all sorts of equipment. Izuku wasn't quite the one to be doing machinery, but there was nothing he could do yet. What was currently annoying was the fact he actually had to place it inside of the mask. That part was hard without any proper tutorial. Find all sorts of ways to connect it inside the mask, yet he barely had any ideas. How convenient. But he kept working, because patience is the key to success. He wasn't going to get anywhere if he tries to speed this process up more than required. There weren't a lot of technical bits to the suit, so he was in luck there. But there were essentials he was going add on later, stuff like air filters and hidden pockets. He didn't have the time nor resources to add everything. By the time it hit midnight, the only things he had implemented were the lenses to his mask. The rest he was able to accomplish was a well-sewn suit. He was quite proud of the mostly neat spider logo he was able to carve. It was secured right in the middle of his chest, just how he thought was perfect. Exhausted, he didn't even bother changing into any sort of pajamas before he fell over straight onto his bed in a dramatic fashion, finally letting his eyes rest. He was ready to move on to the next day without any fears that he hadn't done enough. Well, that was until the tingly sensation in the back of his skull was ready to strike back out of nowhere. Danger was near him. Well, there went his plans of sleeping. He forced himself out of his bed. He was fully awake in under a second. He had no intentions of standing by and doing nothing when he knows he can do something now, even if it's something small. He couldn't let himself stand by and do nothing, not anymore, not anytime soon. Looking outside his window curiously in the depths of the night, he could see in the near distance smoke piling up and flowing into the air. What he could also hear were people in distress, screaming and running for safety left and right. Although the sound was muffled, that didn't mean he couldn't hear it. It didn't mean he wasn't going to take any action. His mother was probably asleep by now. She won't check on him anytime soon as long as he's quiet. Izuku didn't hesitate to put on his suit for the first time and grab the same gloves he wore when he stopped a pickpocketer with Katsuki, the same person he admires the most besides All Might. Although he wasn't going to dwell on that further. He didn't have any time to waste. He had to get moving. Just for safety, he took some shoes, the usual, beaten up and old pair of red shoes he always wears alongside some shorts and a flimsy jacket, in case he needs to blend into the crowd. He didn't feel like getting arrested tonight, that's for sure. Though he made sure to not zip up the jacket, he wanted for everyone to remember his logo. It is definitely going to be the easiest thing someone can recognize him for. He didn't hesitate to jolt out his house and do the same things he does every night. Swinging from building to building, soaring through the night was basically almost natural to him. No matter how many issues he had, swinging was never one of them. Even on his first tryout, he didn't have much issues. He scanned every corner of the street as he kept moving. It was a lot more crowded now. He felt his heart race every time someone pointed out his presence in the sky. It was extremely nerve-wracking. There weren't a lot of people that noticed, but for some reason, despite that being his goal, to be easily noticeable, he feels very anxious upon every pointed finger thrown at him from the people below. He isn't quite used to the attention. It made him feel judged. Taking deep breaths, he kept looking around, letting his danger sense guide him to said danger. He knew he was close thanks to his hearing and other very obvious factors related to using his eyes to do something as simple as seeing. He sometimes forgets how good his vision is now. Letting himself land on his knees upon reaching a tall building nearby. The disaster, completely ignoring the ache caused by doing so, it was going to pass anyway. Izuku crouched and took a moment to analyze the situation. First, roughly 20 people were endangered. The problem was a robbery. The person who committed the crime seemingly had a fire-related quirk, apparent from the fire blocking a very large amount of people from getting to safety. There were more very obvious danger signs, although the most important one was the possibility of rubble from the buildings all around beginning its fall and hitting one of the civilians. It was a situation not all that rough, but it was definitely endangering a hefty amount of people. The first thing Izuku decided to do was take a dive off the building, getting into proper position as he swiftly shot out a web and clung onto it as if his life depended on it. Heroes looked at him like he was crazy. He could hear their pleas for him to leave the area, but he didn't. He knew he couldn't. He let himself reach the ground for a split second whilst still swinging, grabbing two people in his grip, making sure they didn't fall out by abusing his ability to stick to surfaces. The people were screaming in fear, which shortly after made Izuku remember that he needs to prioritize the people's mental states as well. Don't worry, I'm taking you two to safety first. I need to come back for the rest later, so if you have any questions, you can ask now. He flinched upon hearing his new voice. It was odd to forget you temporarily sound very different than normal. Are you a new hero? One of the people said, clinging onto Izuku tightly, shaking in fear. I can't believe someone actually saved us. The other said with a voice dripping with relief. They smiled at Izuku with a bright smile full of released guilt, and even though his mask didn't show it, Izuku smiled back. He set them off on top of a building carefully. Nobody is injured, correct? He spoke with his usual time as he checked for any possible bruises or injuries from his stupidity or the incident. Both of you can get down using the stairs, right? We can. Thank you so much, young man. Izuku felt his cheeks heat up in embarrassment, but all he did was let out a small laugh and wave them goodbye quickly. He needed to get the other people. So he leaped off once more, swinging back to the location, but this time he was already approached. "Excuse me, can you please take me? I have a child to take care of at home. I need the safety. I don't know what to do. My daughter must be so worried." A rather younger woman spoke, her breath heavy. From what Izuku could tell, she had been here for a while. "How come nobody showed up for the people in here aside from myself?" Izuku muttered to himself, unaware that the lady he just spoke to was able to hear him loud and clear. "They're focused on setting out the fires, they completely forgot about us," she complained, tears starting to stream down her face. "Hey, it's okay. I mean I can get you to safety, no problem." Izuku smiled as he reached out his hand. She clung on and he held her firm. He began to take off, and in the meantime he snagged another person. "Put me down." "Who are you?" An older man spat out, and Izuku could only sigh. It's going to be a long night, but then again he knew it wasn't all that pleasant to get snatched by a masked boy swinging in the air. "It's okay, sir, I'm here to help." He attempted to reassure him, though it didn't seem to help. "I don't believe scum like you. Go back to college instead of wasting your life on this." "I'm still in middle school actually. It is my last year though. I'm graduating in a few months." Izuku corrected him politely. The man didn't seem to like heroes all that much, which kind of saddened him. Both of the people in his hold seemed to be shocked upon hearing that. "Middle school? You're so young, I thought you were an adult." The lady spoke, surprise filling her tone. "Same here." The man added on. Izuku could only laugh to himself, and he got on and set them down. "Both of you are in the state to get down in your own, right? Why take us so far, kid?" The man stared at the pile of smoke in the car distance. "Fresh air." Izuku stayed quiet, looking back at the disaster with him. He got lost in thought. He thought of people back there. They must have been in there inhaling all that smoke for hours. "All right then, well, to answer your question, I have a bit of mobility problems. But we'll manage. You go home and sleep. This isn't something you should be doing at your age." Izuku could hear it all. He felt himself begin to flow out of tune, getting lost in his mind as he heard the discouragement coming from the man's voice, but he brushed it off upon hearing the woman speak once more. "I can help him, you go save the rest, we've been there for a while." "Yeah, thanks for the help." Izuku could only form a weak smile as he swung back once more. He did the same thing roughly around 7 more times. Each one of them was different. Each one of them he was met with different personalities and circumstances that remind him people in danger have a lot more to them than he can always remember. He swung back in one last time, to be met with one man and one woman. He walked over to them, trying to ignore the air that had been slowly polluting his lungs every second he spent inside the circle. It was extremely large. No wonder the heroes are only halfway done when it comes to putting it out. "Okay, are either of you suffering any injuries?" "I only got a burn or two." "You're the rescue hero, right?" the girl asked with curiosity, but Izuku could hear the exhaustion in her voice. The man clung onto her protectively, seemingly protecting her from the disaster long after it has died down, but that didn't mean it is over yet, not by a long shot. "You could say that." Izuku's voice was filled with embarrassment as he spoke. He felt extremely flattered and just proud to be here. He's proud for letting himself successfully save a bunch of people. And these two weren't going to be an exception. "I'm tired. Please save us," she pleaded, and in return Izuku's heart ached with understanding and empathy. He nodded and have a thumbs up. He knew he had to soothe their pains efficiently, something similar to All Might. "Everything is going to be okay." She smiled weakly at him, and the guy next to her nodded along. Izuku was about to make them cling onto him and simply swing over to a building and leave them there like had been doing for quite some time since he arrived at the incident. Possibly take them home considering the lady seemed to be in a weaker state. Until he saw a piece of rubble coming straight for him, the ignored danger warning was maybe a good thing to listen to. Izuku jumped forward without much thinking, and with that he took it upon his instinct and first pushed the couple out the way. The second was to throw a rather large web at the rubble, locking it in place on a wall. It was an extremely close call, closer than he imagined. If he didn't catch it, it would have crushed his skull without a single afterthought. He stared up at his shaking hand. He was frozen in time, but everything around him kept moving. His vein hurt, oddly enough. He bent down and clung onto this shaking arm. The two people near him seemed hesitant to check up on him, but he still noticed their curiosity, so he assured them. I just got caught off guard, he said, his voice changer glitching as he kept on breathing rather heavily. He carefully got up and looked around, then back at the piece of rubble that would have gotten them killed. Let's get going, it's unsafe here. The people nodded. They got by Izuku and he held them tight. He kept swinging, but the pain didn't want to go away. With every passing minute, it burned through every layer of his skin with a strong and stronger sting, and he couldn't do much to cut it out. Izuku felt himself getting sloppier with every swing, but he was able to get them on the building safely. He got his thank yous and then he leaped back one last time, to check if he missed out on anyone. There weren't much pros focused on this area anymore, they were all more busy with a new area now. He did all the work. He sighed in disappointment. He really looked forward to working with them. He wanted to see what it was like to work in a team. Even in school he usually tanked it all solo. What he wished wasn't going to happen was people dismissing him, even as a hero. He knew he had to gain trust, especially since people like him were painted as criminals to the public eye. Police. Hands in the air. Izuku flinched as he felt the burning sensation in the back of his skull spike up again. He slowly turned around to face a group of police officers, so much for not getting arrested. He didn't want to raise his hands up, he didn't feel like it was right of him to do so, so he kept them down. The robber went somewhere that way. I think you got the wrong guy, Izuku said with a slightly shaky tone while he pointed in a random direction. He wasn't used to cops talking to him, let around this aggressively. He watched their guns. They were pointed at him with such precision he felt scared. His slight confidence quickly faded away. He knew his danger sense didn't act up for nothing. The thing he had been subconsciously joking about seeming catched up to him, and it was ready to bite back at any second. Tell us your name. Now. A police officer demanded, stepping closer to Izuku, and he in return started walking backwards as a defense form. That was until he bumped into the wall. He took a deep breath and spoke up. He had to stay calm at all costs. Hell, he could even try playing a persona, just to make sure the police officers realize he wasn't trying to hurt anyone. Maybe coming off as friendly was going to help. I'm Spider-Man. Write that down, one of the officers on the side mumbled. They started to talk between each other as one of their crew members stepped out. Izuku was suddenly faced with a middle-aged woman. She stared into the pits of his lenses, and he could only analyze her appearance. She had a stern look. Out of everyone she held her gun with the most aggression. He could feel it radiating off her as she stepped closer and closer towards him. He suddenly felt his body start to shake. Something about being threatened by someone wasn't really bringing up good memories. He took a deep, shivering breath and awaited his fate. Who do you work for? She spoke with a stern voice, keeping her grip tight and her gaze cold, locked in on him like he was going to run away at any given moment. And it creeped Izuku out, but he knew he had to play it smart, so he forced a smile hidden by his mask, which was basically saving him from death at the moment. Myself. Although his voice carried a shaky tone to it, he was able to sound confident enough in his eyes. But that confidence seemingly did nothing to help his messy case. You think you're clever. You must be working with someone. People like you always do. Kind of rude to assume. Izuku stepped closer, moving away from the wall, as if he wasn't cornered anymore. Although he could still feel his hand burning, and he could feel the rush of memories from all sorts of fights tear him apart, but he tried his best. I guess I'm one of the first. He shrugged. What's your quirk? She demanded, not only ignoring his response but seemingly she didn't look quite happy about the steps Izuku took away from his spot. He stayed quiet, since technically he did have a quirk although he was registered as quirkless. He didn't know what exactly to answer. It was complicated, but then again he remembered the laws, so he shortly after got himself put together and realized what he needed to answer. Speak up or we will use force. She yelled out as she stepped closer to him. The officers in the side pulled out their guns as well. Quirkless, he said in a quieter tone than usual, hoping it would hide his fear. It's a federal crime to lie to a police officer. Cut this short, you are under arrest for unlawful quirk usage. Another officer stepped up and stood by her, and Izuku could only tilt his head to the side in fake confusion. What? But I'm quirkless. I'd show you my ID. But that isn't quite the smartest idea. So, he shrugged, speaking with a hint of irony to his tone. He attempted to step forward, but instead he was met with hostility. Don't move. They started to fire their guns. Izuku could only force himself to dodge every single bullet as he worked as hard as he could with his danger sense, which was making the back of his skull tingle harder to the point it started to hurt with the bullets flying around him every second. Dodging bullets in the middle of the street wasn't really on his bucket list, let alone to be dodging bullets this early on. Seriously, time needed to slow down. Great way to make my night inconvenient. Izuku yelled out in slight frustration as he felt a singular bullet pierce through the bottom of his leg. It burnt like hell. He shut his eyes as he felt tears start to flood them. He was glad he had his mask hiding his face. With a high jump, he shot a web and started to swing away, a simple trick that he hadn't had the opening to do prior. As the police screamed out for him, he could only sigh, so much for trying to be a vigilante. He was having quite the great time helping out all those people just a minute ago. It felt painful to deal with the police now, even though he knew he would have to soon enough. Although he never expected he was going to become a day one target. What he expected less was suddenly getting snatched by someone. He looked around in shock. His danger sense didn't warn him of anything. Then he was able to meet the face of the person that caught him. All Might. All Might. Izuku cheered in joy as he stared up at his hero, who set him down on a rooftop shortly after. Izumi started to cough. Staying in the smoke was catching up to him, it seemed. With every small move of his body, his leg ached harder. He felt slightly dizzy from it all, obvious from his newly gained headache and spinning vision, but that didn't stop him from looking up at All Might once more, who had a disappointed look on his face. Young Midoriya, what do you think you're doing? All Might asked with an anger peeking in his tone. Izuku could hear the contained rage. I was helping a couple of people out when the police decided they didn't quite like me. Wait, how did you recognize me? Izuku titled his head and looked up at All Might. He was in his full form surprisingly enough, though he had standard civilian clothes on, not his hero costume. I definitely wouldn't recognize the kid I've been mentoring in action, not at all. Totally would never guess it's you by your webs. All Might spoke sarcastically, crouching down in front of the kid sitting by him. Right? Izuku said awkwardly, the ring of his voice changer still sounding weird to his own ears, but All Might didn't seem to mind. Listen, okay, first off, I like the suit. Second, kid. Why did you get interrogated by the police? Why were they shooting at you? What happened? All Might's brows furrowed in frustration, looking at Izuku's now injured form. The pain of his shot was burning a lot harder than he originally would have thought it was going to hurt. It just kept on piling up as if the ongoing pain in his forearm wasn't enough. In all the small training he did when it came to shooting out his webs, he never encountered such an issue. Upon realizing he was getting stared at, Izuku shook his head and finally spoke up. It's because I was using my quirk, and since they saw a masked hero they immediately assumed I didn't have a license. Which I don't, but that's not the point. They thought I was working for someone. He groaned. Did you get shot? Yeah. Just in the leg. Izuku straightened the leg that was making him feel as if he was getting burned alive, and All Might could only sigh in frustration. You're being reckless. Don't go around with a mask if these things are going to keep happening. I understand the pain of not being able to act, but you need to remember it isn't safe. You're lucky I was there for the sludge villain. You definitely would have gotten in trouble with the police. He suddenly shifted into his real form, coughing from the transition. Izuku wanted to reach out, but he was kept put as All Might ripped through the suit to be able to access the shot wound. Reaching into his bag, he took out a first aid kit and started preparing to treat his wound. You're less angry than I thought, Izuku said with a heavy breath, taking off his mask to reveal an awkward smile. Oh, I'm mad, but I need to keep calm for any of my words to actually get into your head. Nobody listens to an old screaming man. He began to treat Izuku's wound, which made him bite his tongue and try to handle the newly gained pain like he was supposed to. Trying to take his mind off it, he replied, "Well, I don't think you're old. Not the point. Just listen. If you want to help people before the entrance exam, help them out somewhere where you know there won't be any pros. I don't think it's a good idea to be a masked hero, a vigilante of sorts, especially not when you're going to head over to UA. But then again, I know the struggle, so try to be secretive. All Might warned him, and Izuku realized he was mostly right. I might have gained traction after tonight. I mean, I've saved 20 people so dash. 20? Oh, young Midoriya, you were on a roll. All Might couldn't hold back the smile that crept up on his face upon hearing that, and it just made Izuku start crying once more. He watched as his hero replied while he let the years stream down his face. I have to admit, I am proud, but give up the vigilante thing after entering UA. Izuku swallowed nervously. For some reason, he felt his chest tighten upon hearing that. He didn't know why, but hearing that hurt. I want to. He knew exactly why, he just didn't want to directly mention it yet. What did you say? I don't want to. Kid, we've come quite a way in a short time, why do you want to give it all up? All Might spoke with frustration, looking deep into Izuku's eyes searching for an answer without having the need to wait for him to reply, but he could only find the face of a pained child. Remember the Kaken I talked to you about? A night or few ago. I stopped a mugger. He was trying to mug Kaken. And for the first time, I was able to hold a somewhat normal conversation with him. I know I'm deciding this too soon, I know the stakes I've set up for myself. But I can't stand the thought of never getting the chance to just be normal with him again. Izuku cut himself off with a grit of his teeth as he was hit with a random pain spike. He shut his eyes instinctively once more. I mean, I know he's been horrible to me and I do fear him. But I still want to be friends with him, and I don't know why. He reopened them to look at the hero in front of him. All Might paused, seemingly digesting all of the words thrown at him. Young Midoriya, please think this through. Think with your head and make the right choice. It's the right choice for us. We need a new start. He was quick to defend his choice. The reason he wanted to do this, he didn't want to feel invalidated anymore. You got shot for God's sake? He said with a tone of slight hurt, and Izuku could feel it well. It pained him more than any burning sensation to see his hero be worried, but he knew there wasn't much he could do. I'll be more careful. You don't even know half of the risks dash. That's why I wear this mask to keep the ones I love safe. Nobody is in risk here except for me. And I'm okay with that. Just like you said pros risk their lives every day to save others, I'm no different. Your healing factor is pretty good, it's taking care of this fast. He reassured him instinctively, to break the silence that came up after the answer. He seemingly knew it made sense. Izuku could figure that out from the slight nod he achieved after his small reminder. I should get you to the hospital. Don't. I'll be okay, I heal fast. Izuku replied quickly, attempting to shut down the conversation. This is a pretty bad wound. I will heal. He tried again. Kid, don't be stubborn dash. I said I'm fine. A fat pause began, and Izuku couldn't help but feel guilty, so he did what any normal person would have done. Sorry. All Might nodded, finishing wrapping the bandages around Izuku's leg. I'm going to get you home. Going to school after that wasn't exactly the lost pleasant experience. Walking to school was already a big pain he had to bear. What was worse was his peers were being a lot louder than usual, even the teacher's yells for them to stop talking wasn't doing anything. He could barely focus because of all the shouting and the painkillers All Might had given him. He continued to write in his notebook as if nothing was happening around him. But he could hear it all. They were talking about him. And none of them knew. With every chatter, with every quiet comment he could hear his name, they weren't talking about him like he was an obstacle to dodge, a punching bag to hit. They talked about him with voices full of pride, curiosity, or admiration. His lips twisted into a weak smile as he kept listening onto their conversations. He could hear every compliment on his suit, in his unique quirk, every positive remark left him with red cheeks. He isn't used to people complimenting him, let alone this many people. This was all so new to him, it was able to distract him from the aches in his leg. He was just glad the pain in his arm passed. He assumed it was from how much webbing he used. It probably was an overload. Bakugo, what about you? Do you like Spider-Man? Izuku looked at him with a side eye, right at Katsuki. For unknown reasons, his heart started to race as he awaited his answer. The random spike in excitement was practically killing him. He's annoying. I've met the guy before he even had his fancy but suit. And that single comment made the class erupt into questions. All sorts of things they wanted to know were being said out loud, and Izuku could only look away and pretend he didn't hear what he just heard. He had to be honest, that single comment crushed his spirit. But then again, he knows Kaken, he knows he can still have time to warm up to him. He would have been a lot more harsh if he hated him as much as he usually does, right? It just made sense to him. Oh, shut up. If you want to know so badly, then go ask him when you see him and stop bothering me. Your voices are insufferable extras. Katsuki spat out angrily, small explosions erupting from his hands out of frustration. The class started to argue with him, and Izuku rolled his eyes and got straight back to writing down what was on the board. It was messy from chalk due to the fact someone didn't clean it properly, but he could still see the words splattered on the mess somehow. Silence! Don't make me send all of you into the principal's office. The teacher shouted out once again, and this time a majority did calm down. But with a majority came exceptions. Like we'd all fit in a tiny bit office, maybe throw some of these rejects out and we can start considering it. Katsuki laughed to himself, but in return he was met with nasty stares and an annoyed teacher. Language! He only scoffed and rolled his eyes as he leaned back into his chair, and Izuku watched from a distance, like he always had. He still wanted to talk to him about so many things, but he couldn't. So he did what he knew best. A guy leaned in his chair and tapped Katsuki to grab his attention, who shifted with annoyance to look at his classmate. So you actually met him? Katsuki gritted his teeth and rolled his eyes, then he spoke up with crossed arms. Yes, he's annoying, end of story. Come on, don't be lame, man. He's the hot topic everyone's curious about where he came from. Their classmate smirked, which surprisingly annoyed Izuku. He didn't have much to comment about that. Not my FING problem, so shut up. You're so boring. The classmate groaned and he leaned back further. Say that again. Katsuki threatened. Whatever, man. He groaned. Izuku quickly looked away after realizing Katsuki met his gaze shortly after their classmate moved their attention to someone else. His heart started to beat faster in a panicked manner. All his pain felt amplified by 1,000. He awaited something, anything, but he was met with a look full of disgust and anger as he looked away. He let out a quiet, exhausted sigh of relief. He didn't know exactly what he expected, he's just glad he didn't get a harsh response. He went back to looking at him from afar. He felt oddly excited after forming the idea in his head that eventually, if he tries hard enough, they could become friends. Maybe he was right, maybe it would work. He really looked forward to their next meet with him as Spider-Man. Because he knew things will be different, one way or another. He continued to watch from afar until class ended. The second he heard that bell ring, he was basically right out the classroom. He jolted down the crowded hallways even if his leg was still halfway done healing. Izuku rushed down the stairs, he just wanted to get home already. As soon as he was out the school gates, he slowed down his steps to a normal rate. The feeling of being out of school was so freeing, he couldn't wait to get back home and fix his suit, most importantly go on the internet and see what people think of him. He wants to see if any one of the victims reported any updates too, just to see if everyone was safe in the end. His smooth train of thoughts was cut shortly after they began by the feeling someone was approaching him. He could hear the footsteps of someone running in his direction. Deku! Izuku whipped his head around to be met with Katsuki running right at him. His eyes popped wide in shock and he stuttered the second he saw him. Kaken? He stood in front of him panting, ignoring all of the people around. What's up with you, nerd? Huh? Izuku tilted his head in confusion. Odd way to start a conversation with someone after you've been ignoring them for the last God knows how long. His mind started to race with questions he knew he couldn't ask. You were silent while everyone was yapping their mouths off about that new spider guy. Katsuki held a serious gaze, and it made Izuku nervous, beyond nervous. He swallowed uncomfortably as he shifted, starting to play with the collar of his uniform. What? I don't understand what your dash. Deku, don't effing this me off. Katsuki's hands started to emit small explosions as his voice got louder. Okay, calm down. I don't understand dash. You never shut up about heroes. He pointed at Izuku's other hand, which was holding his slightly blown-up notebook. You write all sorts of crazy shit in there, you're literally obsessed. You were the only one who wasn't talking about him. Damn it. Izuku thought to himself in frustration. He felt his heart being to race as he thought of a lie or excuse to say to get himself out of this as fast as possible. He was out of words. His mind was blank of any thought. He had no idea what to do or say at the moment. Spit it out already, Deku. Katsuki spat out in annoyance, impatient with Izuku's lack of response. He didn't understand why it interested him so much. It really left Izuku confused. He couldn't really come up with any logical reason as to why he of all people would care about him not talking about his very much secret identity. I don't like him. Katsuki said in confusion. Okay, you're just bullshitting. I'm not. I don't think he's a hero. He paused for a second, quickly getting back to talking the second he realized Katsuki was in fact waiting for him to keep talking. He's a rouge. Vigilante. And I think he's going to do more harm than good. Yeah. Izuku could practically hear the lies in his voice, and they didn't even have a correct ring to them. He's stupid. I can't believe out everyone in that diamond class full of extras. You're the one with common sense. I did hear he saved a couple people last night though. Izuku was quick to defend himself. Where? He demanded. Near that one book cafe thing. Izuku attempted to recall the buildings that were around him, with small luck. He mostly paid attention to the people, and that was the exact thing he needed to work on. He needed to work on remembering his surroundings more. It's going to be of help sooner or later. Whatever. Move out my way, nerd. Katsuki said as he walked the opposite direction of Izuku. He blinked twice as he watched him walk away angrily before he started giggling to himself. What an odd conversation. Izuku thought to himself as he began heading home, thinking about what this was even all about.